Chapter 5:16. There was no need to listen to any more words. When everyone opened their eyes, no matter how thick the fog was, it could not hide the hidden truth behind it. Crippled old Eight's wife had just fainted from crying and was then strangled. Now that she heard everyone's gossip, she took a deep breath and tightly clutched her chest. She looked at the mayor, who she had always respected like a father, as if she had seen an evil ghost. You really did it. Then why did you kill my husband and the others? They have always been honest. They have never done anything bad, and they have never done anything wrong to you. The mayor's facade of benevolence and kindness for many years was completely torn off today. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he had gone crazy. He roared in a very terrifying voice, "Who said they didn't do anything wrong to me? 3 years ago, on that morning, they made the biggest mistake, and that was to disobey my orders and release my son while I and my wife were preparing for the ceremony. If they hadn't released him, how could he have had the chance to jump into the well? Yes, what you said just now was right. I did kill those people, but so what? They all deserved to die. If it weren't for them, my son wouldn't have been possessed. Each of them was an evil ghost sent by the Azura of hell. They bewitched my son and pushed him to that dead end." The truth was completely revealed. Everyone was shocked and took a few steps back, not daring to accept the truth in front of them. But no matter how difficult it was to accept, they had to accept it. Crippled old Eight's wife was so frightened that her whole body trembled. She cried for the injustice of her innocent husband, but my husband and the others released the young master because they were good friends who grew up together. When they saw him in pain, they wanted to help him, for his own good. The mayor fiercely said, "Shut up. You ignorant idiots, how do you know what's good for him? In the entire Baijiao town, only I work hard every day, for the sake of our town, to think of ways to protect each and every one of you. Only I know what's good for you, for him." Looking at his face full of madness, Ning Shu frowned and said, "Have you ever thought that what you think is good is actually not really good? Maybe crippled old Eighth is not wrong, and the one who is wrong is you? How is this possible?" The mayor roared, "Our ancestors have lived like this for hundreds of years. How can it be wrong? How am I wrong? They were betrayed and had nowhere else to go. They had no choice but to bring their entire clan to this land. They suffered a lot and shed a lot of blood to build a foundation for us, creating a path for us to survive. In order to protect the prosperity of the entire clan, they set an iron law that forbade intermarriage with other clans. For more than a dozen generations, we have always followed this pattern. Men plowed and women weaved. We were harmonious and united, supporting each other. No one had any disloyalty. We should have continued to walk on this path, following the rules and living well, but who would have thought that our clan would give birth to a beast like Bai Laro-san? The biggest mistake I've made in my life was being soft-hearted. I couldn't resist his pleas and let him out of the town. Half a year later, he brought this woman from a different race back from the outside, and as if someone had cast a spell on him, he spoke crazily in the town all day long, slandering the ancestors and violating the clan rules. He said something about how we can't continue like this, otherwise the Bai clan will definitely face extinction in the near future. Ridiculous, simply ridiculous. We have lived well for so many generations. In recent years, our luck has been bad, and some of our children have been born with disabilities. That is also because the gods have sensed the existence of people like him in advance and have punished him. As long as we wholeheartedly admit our mistakes, kneel and pray, we will definitely be able to resolve the crisis. But no matter how I persuaded him, he was stubborn and became more and more stubborn. What the ancestors said was indeed correct. If we intermarry with other clans, we will definitely be framed by them. That woman from a different race is the main culprit. His stubborn way of thinking made Ren Xing, like Xiao Zhongping, somewhat flabbergasted. She hesitantly asked, "Then what happened? How did you treat Bai Laro-san?" The mayor sneered and turned his head to look at her. "Naturally, we used the clan rules, beat him and that woman half to death, expelled them from the town, and burned down their ancestral home, never allowing them to take a single step in for the rest of their life." His eyes were cold and filled with venom, as well as extreme grief and pain. The two different emotions twisted his entire being. But I didn't expect that before he left, He somehow infected my son with the strange race's black magic, causing my son to be brave enough to leave the town to save him. When he came back half a month later, he had also become like that. That was the only son I had hoped for so many years, the only son who survived. He was forcibly harmed by them. I spent countless words to persuade him, to wake him up, but it was no use. He even clamored to wake everyone here, and if it didn't work, he would completely leave this town. I had no choice but to lock him up in the room, not allowing him to take a single step out of the door. Then, I asked the best doctor in the clan to prescribe medicine for him, and every day, I personally brewed it and fed it to him. I have lived to this age for nothing. I only hope that he can return to his original self, to become the good son that I had raised in the palm of my hand since he was a child. For more than 2 months, I didn't dare to slack off, and I didn't dare to sleep soundly for fear that he would escape. Finally, the medicine took effect, and he became more and more obedient, no longer making noise, and was extremely obedient. Until the Mystic Maiden Festival, I thought that he would soon recover, and I didn't have to worry anymore. So, I locked the door and took the old woman out to prepare for the festival, but who would have thought that cripple old 8 and the others would act on their own and let my son out, stimulating his madness, causing him to go crazy again. He personally strangled his 2 children to death, and then dragged their bodies into the well. You tell me, among so many people, which one of them shouldn't be killed? I wholeheartedly devoted myself to our town, but they colluded to betray me. They should all die, all of them should go to hell. Chapter 5:17. Until now, the old man still didn't realize who was wrong. Looking at the old man's ferocious face, Hui Mo had goosebumps all over his body even though it was a hot day. He rubbed his goosebumps and pulled the frightened Xiao Zhongping behind him. This old man is seriously ill. It's too scary. Princess, hide behind him. Don't be scared by this madman. Holding a flower and smiling, the Buddha, who could save all living beings, uncovered his golden face. No one expected that there was a demon hidden inside. Even the townspeople of Baijia town were frightened. Ning Shu frowned. It was like playing the lute to a cow to deal with such a stubborn person. Xiaoho Qing squeezed her hand and signaled her to leave the rest to him. Today, he was wearing a blue robe, and the veil hat on his head was put on by Ning Shu. Through the veil, his face was faintly discernible. Such a dress made him look like an immortal. As long as he stood there, he was born with a natural aura, which made people not dare to act rashly. When he sneered in a low voice, people's souls trembled. He said, "You said that you were following the rules in order to protect the stability of this place. It sounds dignified, but I'm afraid it's not completely true. You committed 3 murder cases and 9 lives under the banner of doing good for everyone. In fact, you were just defending your own authority." The mayor immediately denied, "You're talking nonsense. I didn't." "Didn't you?" When you were in a hurry to deny it, there was an obvious pause in the middle. You were short of breath and your throat was trembling. Isn't that a sign of your guilty conscience? These subtle reactions may escape the eyes of others, but you underestimated me. Xiaoho Qing's smile deepened, but at the same time, it became colder. He was still standing in the same place indifferently, but the old mayor was forced to step back for some reason. For so many years, you've been holding on to the authority passed down from your ancestors. You've been sitting on the mayor's throne, enjoying the respect and obedience of the people in the town. On this small piece of land, you are like an uncrowned king. On the surface, the statue on the Xian'enyu peak is your religion, but in reality, you are the one who controls the hearts of the people. Everyone has to do as you say. Even walking out of the town gate requires your permission. You have turned all the people in this town into marionettes that you can control as you please. You have always been extremely satisfied with your rule, until the appearance of Bai Laro-san. You personally raised a brat who was still wet behind the ears, but unexpectedly, he didn't become another one of your puppets. Instead, he developed his own thoughts and even clamored about overturning the rules of his ancestors. That deeply touched your reverse scale. Because to you, what he wants to overturn isn't just a rigid rule, but the order you use to control the entire race. That was a set of mythical golden rules that had been passed down for 100 years. It had long been the representative of the authority of every mayor. Breaking one of them meant that your authority was declining day by day, and your brilliance was completely gone. You are incomparably angry and incomparably fearful. You are afraid that once one person succeeded in overturning the iron rule, the second and the third would swarm up. Then what would you be as the mayor? So you tried everything to strangle the first sprout before it was unearthed. You thought you had succeeded, but before you had time to laugh, your own son was cut off from the bottom of the cauldron and became the second sprout. And this sprout couldn't be stopped anymore and completely broke out. Perhaps you still use that set of clichés to appeal, saying that you only wanted revenge out of grief and anger. But was that really the case? If you only wanted to vent your anger, you didn't have to spread all kinds of rumors and slander after killing the fur merchant and Lai Tuzi to frame Xian Nu goddess. You also didn't have to think of ways to humiliate their corpses after killing them. Also, you deliberately created the bloody tears of Xian Nu goddess and spread the appearance of Xian Nu goddess. The root of all these little tricks was still the same purpose: to maintain the authority of Xian Nu goddess, to maintain the authority of the order, and finally, to maintain your own authority. You said that you wholeheartedly wanted to protect the people of the town, but weren't Lai Tuzi and the others your people? It's not an unforgivable mistake to make a mistake out of kindness and cause the death of the young master. However, when you took advantage of their trust in you and killed them, why did you deliberately forget that they were also the people of the Baijia town? Shut up. No matter how many excuses you have, you can't hide your cold-bloodedness, hypocrisy, and greed. Chapter 518. Xiahou Qing finally said, "Your son did not die in the hands of others, but died because of your obsession. You killed your own children and grandchildren with your own hands." The mayor felt as if he had been struck by lightning. No matter how much he quibbled, under Xiahou Qing's questioning, he became pale and powerless. He was like a dying fish lying on the shore, trying his best to open his mouth. His face was ashen as he staggered back. It's not like this, son. I didn't kill you. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong." He blankly raised his head and saw Lai Tuzi's bulging eyes coldly looking at him, as if he was asking for his life. The mayor's throat made a cracking sound as he fell to the ground and fainted. Things had developed to this point. The case had been solved. After 3 years of waiting, the dust had finally settled. The townspeople looked at each other in dismay, not knowing what to do next. They might be ignorant, but the majority of them still maintained a simple and pure heart. 9 lives had been lost, and more than half of them were their own children and grandchildren. This was the first time in history that they had wavered in their faith, and after their faith was shaken, they were deeply at a loss. Looking at the unconscious man on the ground, Shi Yang felt very happy in his heart. He asked, "Shizi Yi, how should we deal with this old man?" Xiahou Qing said, "Inform the prefectural government and the county government officials to come and arrest him. We have already taken care of enough here." "Yes, your subordinate has received the order." Shi Yang lazily cupped his fists. After walking halfway, he turned back and pulled Zigui with him. He said, "The mountain is far away, and there are jackals and wolves on the road. He is afraid and lonely." Zigui gave him a big supercilious look. In the end, he reluctantly followed him. Ju Sai and the others first took the unconscious old mayor away and temporarily locked him up. After the mayor finished dealing with the few innocent victims, a reputable elder stepped forward and let out a long sigh. He arranged for the corpses to be washed and buried in the ground for them to rest in peace. Looking at the broken and humiliated corpses being covered with a layer of rags and slowly carried away, Ning Shu was silent for a long time. Xiahou Qing held her hand and said softly, "What are you thinking about, Xiao Shu?" Ning Shu's gaze was somewhat empty as she muttered, "They are all good people. Not only cripple old 8, Lai Tu Sai, pork mantis, but also by Larosan, the mayor's son, and even the 3 fur merchants. None of them were bad people, but why did the outcome turn out like this?" She felt so sad. Xiahou Qing said, "Xiao Shu is feeling aggrieved for them. Why is it that they have never done anything bad, yet they are not rewarded?" Ning Shu nodded silently. "Yes," said he, "their goodness and bravery have not been in vain." Providence has arranged for them to meet us, and you, little Shu. If you hadn't solved this mystery, they would most likely have ended up like the previous 2 unsolved cases. They would have been implicated by the mysterious theory of ghosts and gods, and would have died a worthless death. But you appeared here. Not only did you help them find the murderer, but you also exposed the ridiculous and harmful system here. You fulfilled the wishes of Bailaro-san and the others, so this should be the ultimate reward for their good deeds. They saw everything that happened in the human world in the netherworld. They must have no regrets and will laugh as they go to reincarnation, right? So, Xiaoshu, you don't have to worry about it. I'm very glad that we encountered this case. In this case, there is one heinous person, but there are 9 benevolent people. This just shows that there are more good people in this world and fewer evil people. The best way for a gentleman to walk the world is to ask for benevolence and get benevolence. Now their benevolence has been fulfilled, and we will continue our search. I'll go with you, okay? His voice was as soft as water, containing all things. Ning Shu was unknowingly wrapped in it. The beliefs that had been shattered on that rainy night were like broken butterfly wings, being glued back by the golden fragments. She tried to flap her wings, which were like a layer of armor, becoming more indestructible. She slowly raised the corner of her mouth, showing a very bright smile. It was like a flaming pomegranate flower in June, bright and beautiful. Then, she put her forehead on his neck, nodded hard, and said, yes. On the side, Hui Mo, who was listening in the corner, was puzzled. He scratched his head and said, it's rare for young Master Shizzy to talk so much in one breath today. He had been following him for 10 years. In his impression, young Master Shizzy had always been a man of few words, especially when it came to showing off. He had never been interested in this kind of thing. Did the sun rise from the west today? No. Don't you know why birds take out their most beautiful feathers when they seek a mate? Ju Sai faintly cast a glance at him and continued to do his work. Hui Mo was left alone in the same place. He suddenly realized, you mean the peacock spreading its tail? It turns out that young Master Shizzy is such a man. He was so excited that his voice was too loud. Xiahou Qing, who was not far away, immediately showed a mysterious smile and said coldly, the population of the Baijia town is simple, and there is no specialized coroner. It's not easy to clean up the body of the pig. Hui Mo, you go and help. Remember, this is a good person who died in vain. You must be respectful and cautious. Do not neglect, and do not leave a trace of filth. Hui Mo felt like he was struck by lightning. Chapter 519. Outside the Coffin Manor, Hui Mo looks at the door that he doesn't want to step into. He wants to go back to the time before and slap himself. Who told you to talk too much? Who told you to talk too much? This is the price you have to pay for talking too much. Looking at his infinitely sad expression, Xiao Zhongping couldn't help but laugh out loud. Hui Mo looked at her pitifully, and there was no need for words to express his begging. Xiao Zhongping stops smiling and raises her chin slightly. Don't even think about it. I'm a princess. I won't go in with you even if I die. Hui Mo lowers his head in disappointment and sighs. He opens the door and walks in. He looks back 3 times. He looked exactly like a homeless puppy. He was born with the air of a candid youth, and his eyes were exceptionally clear, as if they were shining. In the past few years, he had grown very tall, only about an inch shorter than Xiahou Qing, and he was still growing. Wherever he went, people would praise him with the phrase, "Which family's handsome young man?" Being stared at by such eyes, Xiao Zhongping doesn't know why, but she can't help but turn her head. When Hui Mo's figure is about to disappear into the door, she impulsively says, "Hurry up. I'll wait for you for 2 hours at most. I'm telling you, if you still don't come out after the time is up, I'll leave by myself." "I won't wait for you." In the Coffin Manor, Hui Mo's eyes suddenly light up. He smiles brightly as if he has secretly eaten honey. He suddenly feels that the night fragrance of the corpse in front of him is not smelly anymore. It is fresh and elegant, refreshing. He quickly put on his gloves and covered his face with a cloth, then shouted, "Good, good, good. Your Highness, I dare not to disobey your order. He. In the inn, Juicy helps Xiahou Qing to change clothes and take a bath. The large pool was filled with a thick medicinal fragrance. As soon as Xiahou Qing entered the pool, he felt a stinging pain where he was soaked in the medicinal bath. He frowned slightly, silently enduring the pain of thousands of needles attaching to his body. His plum blossom kiss was already incurable. Every day, the fourth petal would quietly grow and spread, like a leech clinging to his flesh and blood, greedily sucking away his life. Moreover, he clearly felt that his hearing was being devoured and nibbled away along with the appearance of the plum blossom petal. It was sometimes good and sometimes bad. Master Duan knew about his condition and had specially prepared this medicinal bath for him before he left. Even so, it could only delay the deterioration of his hearing as much as possible. As for when it would completely disappear, he closed his eyes and laughed at himself. Ever since he had gone blind for a few years, he had thought that he had made all the necessary preparations and that nothing could scare him anymore. However, he had overestimated himself. He was terrified, and even slightly terrified. What he was afraid of was not death, but if he lost his sense of hearing and became a walking corpse, then there would be no difference between his enemies and family members standing in front of him. He would not be able to sense her happiness, sadness, predicament, and despair. If that happened, Xiahou Qing would really become a good-for-nothing. How would he face his Xiao Shu? He would be even worse than a cat or a dog. Seeing his self-deprecation, Juicy was burning inside. Your Highness, things have not reached the worst stage yet. There is still time. We will definitely be able to make it in time. Xiahou Qing casually waved his hand. There is no need to comfort me. The heavens have their own conclusions. Why don't you talk about the current situation in the capital? 2 days ago, he had secretly sent Tianwen back to the capital to gather his spies and investigate. Every 4 hours, he would send a messenger pigeon. At the same time, he had used his identity as Nanping Prince to issue a death order. He had to do everything he could to protect Princess He Xin and the Duke's estate before they returned to the capital. Remembering the latest secret letter he had just received, Juicy immediately became serious and solemnly said, Your Highness, the capital is in complete chaos. Chapter 520. Xiahou Qing accepted the tea that Juicy offered and took a sip to suppress the pain that surged through his body. His voice was slightly hoarse as he asked, What happened? Juicy took out a secret letter. A few days ago, Princess Royal's daughter He Rui was murdered. His Majesty ordered Princess He Xin to be locked up in the prison, and the spearhead was pointed at her. His Majesty was furious and wanted to sentence her to death and execute her whole family. At this critical juncture, the tomb of the previous emperor was washed away by heavy rain. The northwest corner of the tomb suddenly collapsed, revealing a stone tablet. On it were written the words Demon Empress brings disaster to the country. That day, an 8-year-old child suddenly disappeared from a family in the east of the city. 3 days later, another child disappeared from the south of the city. Just yesterday, another child was reported to have been kidnapped from the north of the city. At this time, there were a total of 3 children. The place where each child disappeared had a strange black talisman drawn on it, pointing at the tomb. It was strange and unpredictable. His Majesty had a headache and ordered the 108 monks of Xianghua Temple to rush to the tomb to expel the misfortune and seal the demon tablet. However, in the secret letter sent by Tianwen at noon today, it said that after the 108 monks chanted for a day and a night in the tomb, a lotus blood letter suddenly fell from the sky. On it were written the words, If the demon empress is not eliminated, the country will be overturned. The most suspenseful part was not this. The old man left in the palace, the eunuch by the previous emperor's side 25 years ago, testified that the stone tablet and the blood letter had a total of 12 words that looked like the previous emperor's own handwriting. His Majesty personally went to examine it. After seeing it clearly, he spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted. The palace wanted to suppress this matter, but things did not go as planned. Now, the news has spread throughout the city. The court and the people are terrified. The capital is in complete chaos. Juicai's short words were written in a flat and straightforward manner, but the danger in it was like a huge wave, causing people's heartstrings to tighten. If things really developed to that point, not only the capital, but the entire Great Yu would be like eggs in a storm, with the possibility of being destroyed at any time. Those in the eggs could cry and wail, but they could not escape the fate of being destroyed. Suddenly, there was a muffled clap of thunder on the horizon. Xiahou Qing put down the cup in his hand and cocked his head to listen. Outside, the commoners were running and shouting, communicating with each other. This damned heaven, it changes just like that. Hurry up and pack up your clothes and things. If the rain leaks into the house, hurry up and grab a basin to wait for the rain. If it leaks into the house, it will be a disaster. The blazing sun that was as hot as fire was instantly covered by layers of dark clouds. Under the blue dome of heaven, not a single ray of light could be seen. A huge gust of wind blew. The sky had completely changed. Xiahou Qing had a complicated expression on his face. It was hard to fathom. After a moment, he seemed to have finally made a decision. He said coldly, "We have to return to the capital as soon as possible." Ju Sai raised his head in astonishment. This is the darkest and most difficult time in the capital. It's impossible to guard against all kinds of open and covert attacks. This case has obviously involved the previous emperor and the previous dynasty. Now that the emperor is seriously ill and dying, the candidate for the crown prince is still undecided. It's too late for other people to avoid disaster. Not to mention, Lady Ning's injuries haven't healed and her mind hasn't fully recovered. You, heir presumptive, please reconsider. Xiahou Qing's voice was low and firm. It's because she hasn't recovered that I have to make this decision for her. She treats her family like jewels and treasures, and the House of Duke is now like the most fragile boat in the storm. It can be crushed into powder by this power struggle at any time. If I take her to avoid disaster here, although I can protect her safety, when she wakes up one day, she will blame herself and regret it for the rest of her life. I don't want her to face that kind of day in the future, so even if it's like a man-eating vortex, I have to go back and take a look. Not to mention, the current situation in the capital must have something to do with that person. Now that my fourth plum petal has already grown halfway, will the fifth be far away? To me, death is only a matter of time. If I hide here now, I'll be ashamed of my title as the heir of Prince Nanping. Even if I walk to the end and can't save my own life, I have to drag that person into hell with me. Otherwise, how can I feel at ease leaving Xiaoshu alone in this dangerous human world? Chapter 521. Juicy heard that he had the intention to arrange for the future generations and felt sad. He knelt on the ground and said, "Shizi Yi, I ask you not to say any more. You are a good person and will be able to turn misfortune into blessing. Moreover, Miss Ning is so dependent on you now. If you really die, what will Miss Ning do? Also, in our Wang Fu, Wang Yi and Wang Fei only have you. If they lose you, how sad will they be? How will Nanping Wang Fu survive? Therefore, whether it is for the future of the Wang Fu or for Miss Ning, I beg Shizi Yi not to give up your life." Xiahou Qing didn't care and waved his hand. He smiled and said, "When I was 10 years old, I suddenly had a plum blossom kiss. I talked with my father once. If one day I can't protect Nanping Wang Fu, he will adopt a member of the royal family as his heir. He will inherit the hundreds of years of Nanping Wang Fu and protect every inch of land in Yunyang province. He will ensure that the people of Yunyang province live in peace and prosperity. This person is you." Juicy looked up in surprise. "Shizi Yi?" "Ahem," Xiahou Qing coughed and revealed a secret that had been sealed for many years. "Juicy, you were originally from the bloodline of Emperor Gaozu's third son, King Le. During the rebellion of the 8 princes, King Le was loyal and upright, but he was framed. King Le's mansion was destroyed. Your grandfather was lucky enough to escape from the capital under the protection of a eunuch. After that, he changed his name and grew up in a rural family. That eunuch was King Le's confidant. In order to protect King Le's last bloodline, he didn't reveal your background until he died. However, this information was accidentally leaked in the end. The successive emperors, in order to eliminate the root of the problem, issued secret orders to hunt down your whole family. In the end, only you were left. My father saved you and secretly hid you. A few years later, You served me with the identity of a small guard with Shi Yang and Huemore. In the past 10 years, I gave all my skills to the four of you and observed you at the same time. Among the four of you, Huemore was kind and ignorant. Shi Yang's personality was unrestrained. Tian Wen had more than enough wisdom but not enough temperament. Only you were calm and hardworking. You were the most capable of taking on big responsibilities. Back then, the four of you were sent to me together. I wrote down 4 skill books on paper and placed them in front of you for you to choose from. Although you took the last book, I knew that you had never given up on the others. Shi Yang followed Shifu and practiced 1,000 arrows every day. Whenever you had time, you would follow him without saying a word. When you cut your hand with the bow and arrow, the next day you would continue to practice strategy with me without changing your countenance. When Tian Wen was learning to read 10 lines at a glance, he was in so much pain that he had to climb the wall all day long to escape. You didn't sleep at night and secretly practiced. Even when Hui Mo chose to study medicine, you did your best to dabble in it. Juicy, over the years, I have paid attention to your efforts, but I have rarely praised you. But today, I want to tell you that you have indeed lived up to my expectations. Therefore, there's nothing for me to worry about when the Nanping mansion is in your hands in the future. Your Highness, this subordinate is incompetent. Ju Sai raised his head again, his eyes red. No, during the Battle of White Wolf Mountain 3 years ago, everyone said that it was my credit. However, at that time, my poison flared up and I was already an arrow at the end of its flight. If you hadn't sent word to father in time to lead the troops away, I'm afraid I would have perished under the wind and sand. Therefore, Juicy, other than you, no one else can take over my position. You are the heir of the royal family and the best choice for the next heir of the Nanping mansion. Xiahou Qing raised his hand, indicating that this matter had been decided and that there was no need to say anything else. In the boiling medicinal bath, floating mist rose in spirals and shrouded his body. The mist swayed and formed all kinds of illusory images in the air before dissipating into nothingness. He smiled and said in a low voice, "As for Xiao Shu, she is a brave and resourceful woman with a strong heart. She dares to love and hate, surpassing thousands of men in the world. Therefore, one day, when I really return to dust, she will be sad for a while. However, I believe that she will have the courage and ability to walk out and let go. My Xiao Shu deserves the best marriage in the world. Unfortunately, that person is not me." Chapter 522. Outside the window, the rain finally fell. The rain was very heavy, and pomegranate flowers fell to the ground. The dazzling fiery red color was like the tail feathers of a phoenix floating in the water. Like the blood-red plum blossoms on the side of his neck, they appeared particularly warm and dazzling in this turbulent wind and rain. Xiahou Qing listened quietly to the sound of the rain falling outside the window. His 5 fingers gently stroked his eyes, which were only for decoration, and he chuckled to himself. His greatest regret in life was that he didn't know what his Xiao Shu looked like until he died. 100 years later, when he was waiting by the Yellow Spring or the Bridge of Helplessness, what should he do if he missed her? A burst of reckless footsteps suddenly pushed open the door and barged in. "Who is so unruly?" Ju Sai immediately pressed down on his sword. When he saw the person clearly, he released his hand and said in surprise, "Miss Ning?" In the bath, Xiahou Qing's hands were as fast as the wind. He hurriedly put the fake skin used to cover the plum blossoms on the side of his neck and grabbed an inner garment to put on. "Miss Ning, my family's Shizzy is bathing. It's really inconvenient to disturb him. Please wait outside for a moment. Shizzy will come out to accompany you after bathing. Please." "Miss Ning." Ju Sai tried to stop her, but Ning Shu didn't play by the rules. He couldn't really do anything to her. She protected the things in her hands and ducked under Ju Sai's arm. She ran to the side of the pool and crouched down. She held all the good things hidden in her arms in front of him. Tangerine duck, crystal cake, lotus cake, and ice cream cheese. Good things, all for you. Her voice was as clear and moving as the sound of the rain outside. No matter how cold a heart was, it would melt in such a voice. Ju Sai said awkwardly, "Shizzy, this," Xiahou Qing's thin lips pursed. After a moment of struggle, he finally chose to indulge himself. He raised his hand and said, "You can leave first." The person by the pool bent her knees. Her eyes were red as she carefully held the things she thought were the best in front of him. The person in the pool had her wet hair spread out in the water. Her jade-like face was filled with a gentleness she didn't even notice. Ju Sai looked up at the scene in front of him and was speechless for a long time. He quietly bowed his head and retreated to guard the door. He listened to Ning Shu's slightly panting breaths and said with a smile, "Little Shu, are you worried that I'm hungry, so you came to find me? You look tired. You won't be hungry after eating." Ning Shu nodded vigorously. She was worried that he couldn't see, so she picked up a piece of crystal cake and brought it to his lips, wanting to feed him with her own hands. Xiahou Qing asked, "Has Xiaoshu eaten yet?" Ning Shu shook her head. "Not yet. Let's eat together." Xiahou Qing chuckled and took the pastry. My little Shu is really a good girl who understands others. If she becomes a wife in the future, she will definitely be a good wife and mother who is careful and gentle. A faint blush appeared on Ning Shu's cheeks. She put down the plate in her arms and leaned towards him with her hands on the edge of the pool. "Marry you," she said without hesitation. Her glass-like eyes were full of his reflection, and she couldn't let go of anything else. "Only marry you." In the bathtub, Xiahou Qing, who was very close to her, was shocked. An uncontrollable heat rose in his chest. His Xiao Shu actually wanted to marry him as his wife. His Xiao Shu was only willing to marry him as his wife. Impulse and greed were like fireworks exploding in his mind. He wanted to immediately hold her hand, to kiss her lips, to pull her into his arms without caring about anything else, to pull her into his bones and blood, to let her accompany him in life and death, to completely merge with her, to never be separated again. What future? What future? What life and death? Why should he care? Why should he care? He, Xiahou Qing, was a person of flesh and blood. He had impulse, greed, and desire. Why should he let go? Why couldn't he be selfish? Why couldn't he indulge? Why did he have to be the perfect saint that everyone said? Why did he have to push her into the arms of another man? How could he be willing? How could he be willing? Chapter 523. But after so much unwillingness, he finally clenched his fists and forced down the vigorous heat in his chest. He suppressed the sharp pain all over his body and made his limbs numb. He took 2 steps back to the center of the bath and turned his face away. He said in the coldest tone, "Marriage is decided by the parents. The 3 letters and 6 rites, the 3 matchmakers, and the 6 betrothal gifts are not child's play. Xiao Shu, you must not make such a joke in the future. I am handicapped and not worthy of your marriage. You were seriously injured before, so I couldn't tell you clearly. Now that you are gradually recovering, there are some things I must hand over to you. As a woman, it is inconvenient for you to watch me bathe here. You must not do this again in the future. I took care of you before because you and I had made an agreement long ago and made a blood oath that could not be violated. There were some areas where I was not considerate enough and caused you to misunderstand. It is my fault. In the future, I will pay more attention and will not offend you again. There is another thing I forgot to tell you. In fact, before you lost your memory, you were already engaged. That person is someone you can rely on. He treats you sincerely. Tomorrow, we will leave for the capital. In 3 to 5 days, you will be reunited with him. Ju Sai, please ask Lady Ning to leave." There was a short silence outside the door, and then a muffled yes. Looking at him walking further and further away, and then at Ju Sai, who opened the door and walked over with a cold face, Ning Shu became anxious and threw herself into the bath without caring about anything else. No. She was so agitated that she slipped and fell to the bottom of the bath. She choked on the water and desperately struggled in the bath. Xiahou Qing's expression changed and he immediately picked her up. Xiahou Qing realized that he was too anxious. When she steadied herself by the side of the bath, he immediately flicked his sleeves and let go of her. He kept a distance of 5 feet and coldly faced her. He flew into a rage. "What are you doing? Do you want to die? Ning Shu coughed violently and grabbed his hand. She urgently expressed her feelings. I only like you. I only want to marry you. I don't want anyone else. Her heart was in a mess, as if there were a lot of things that she wanted to say, but she couldn't sort them out. She could only tell him her feelings and determination over and over again, as if she was a child. Xiahou Qing's long eyelashes trembled. If he opened his eyes right now, they would have turned red. However, he didn't. Instead, he calmed his heart and said again, Juicy, are you deaf? Take Lady Ning out of here immediately. They were preparing to leave for the capital the next day. From this day on, Lady Ning and I will not be staying in the same room, nor will we eat. We will not speak within 3 zhong of the carriage. Do you remember this? Ju Sai could not bear it in his heart, but he had no other choice. He could only reply, this subordinate will keep it in mind. Miss Ning, leave with this subordinate. If you insist on not leaving, then I can only ask Miss Hong Fei and the others to escort you out. Go away. Don't touch me. Ning Shu forcefully pushed Ju Sai away and ran toward Xiahou Qing. I want you. I only want you. Xiahou Qing's lips curved into a cold smile. He retreated step by step, increasing the distance between them. You see, you don't even remember my name. How can you say that you admire me? How can you say that you want me? You and I were originally strangers. We were accidentally connected by an alliance. After you were seriously injured, you were really miserable. I pitied you, pitied you. Now that you have recovered, my pity ends here. Ning Shu's wet face swayed in the wind and rain like the pomegranate flowers outside the window. She did her best to chase after him and reach out to grab him. However, she could only watch as Xiahou Qing came ashore from the pool, put on his outer robe, and walked out without any reluctance. He didn't even look back. As Ning Shu staggered, she accidentally kicked over the plate she had brought over from the side of the pool. The fragrant orange duck, the translucent crystal cake, the crispy lotus leaf cake, and the ice cream cheese that she loved the most but couldn't bear to eat all rolled into the medicinal bath. Before they could float, they had already disappeared into the bottom of the pool. It was very similar to her heart. Chapter 524. Early the next morning, the carriage officially set out and left Baijia town. Ju Sai entered the carriage from outside and reported in a low voice, Miss Ning hasn't eaten a single grain of rice or drank a single drop of water since yesterday morning. She's been throwing a tantrum all night. Xiahou Qing was draped in a spring and autumn cloak. He clenched his fists and coughed lightly. Compared to yesterday, his complexion was even paler. It was clearly summer, but he felt as if he had turned himself into a block of ice. Over the past few days in Baijia town, she has gradually stopped rejecting other people. Now that she's suddenly leaving me, it's a bit hard for her to accept. After a while, she'll get better. Ju Sai lowered his eyes and softly replied, yes. After coughing for a while, Xiahou Qing took a sip of the tea Ju Sai handed him. He said, you think I've done something wrong, don't you? Ju Sai considered it for a long time. In the end, he couldn't help but say, this subordinate doesn't think the heir has done something wrong. I just think that Miss Ning hasn't fully recovered yet. Her temperament and mind are slowly recovering. Right now, the only person in this world that she can completely rely on is you, the heir. You've suddenly drawn a clear line with her. It seems a bit too cruel for her, so it's understandable that she can't accept it right now. If you take things slowly and subtly pull away from her bit by bit, perhaps Miss Ning will find it easier to accept. No, you don't understand her. With her personality, if she's close, she'll be close. If she's far, she'll be far away. If there's no one in her heart, she won't drag things out. If she admires someone, she'll even put her life down. Even if she hasn't fully recovered from the damage to her mind, the principles and propriety in her bones haven't changed. Dragging things out won't have any effect on her. On the contrary, it'll make her even more unwilling to leave me. If I wait until the day she fully recovers, I'm afraid So, it has to be now. He didn't know when his heart had been moved. Perhaps it was when she was fearless in the face of 100,000 people at the Phoenix Terrace. Perhaps it was when he had pushed her into the secret passage without saying a word during the explosion in the western suburbs. After she had recovered from her shock and anger, she had flatteringly said to him, "Thank you, Your Highness, for saving my life. I will never forget it." Perhaps it was that cold spring morning when he had met such a thick-skinned woman for the first time in his life, who had rashly barged into the prince's residence and shamelessly wanted to form an alliance with him. Or perhaps it was under the cold moon, under the lonely parasol tree in the ancestral tomb of the Qi family, when he had almost broken her neck, she had boldly taken the opportunity to steal the jade pendant from his waist. It must have been at a time when even he hadn't noticed that he had instinctively ordered Tianwen to watch her every move in order to prevent her from betraying the alliance. In fact, he didn't know the specific reason. Thus, he knew that the Yun family's young master had met her at the Plum Mountain. He knew that the sixth prince, Xiao Yuni, was her childhood sweetheart and had been pestering her. He knew that after the cloud leaf poison was cured, she had drawn a clear line between them and no longer had anything to do with him. He also knew that Xiao Yuni had forced her to see him many times and threatened her with their old relationship, but she still kept a respectful distance from him and had never been too indecisive. How could such a person like her tolerate indecisiveness when she was so clear-cut? Thus, no matter how unwilling he was, how unbearable it was, and how painful it was, he had to completely push her away. There was no other way. In this way, when everything returned to normal in the future, perhaps her resentment towards him would lessen. Juicy finally understood and knelt on one knee. "This subordinate is stupid and didn't understand Your Highness's deep meaning. Please punish me." Xiahou Qing coughed again and frowned. He helped him up. "I said that you are the next successor of the Nanping Prince's estate that I have chosen. You don't have to be a servant anymore." Juicy had already made a decision in his heart. "No, Your Highness is Your Highness and my benefactor. This subordinate didn't sleep last night. Juicy is grateful for Your Highness's favor and kindness, but this subordinate has already made a decision. Juicy will be Your Highness's servant for the rest of my life. The only successor of the Nanping Prince's estate will always be Your Highness. When we return to the capital this time, this subordinate will protect Your Highness's life even if my body is smashed to pieces. You will definitely live on and live peacefully until you are 100 years old. At that time, His Highness would no longer have to be separated from his beloved woman and would no longer be in such pain." Juicy. For the first time, Juicy ignored his order. "Your Highness, Miss Ning hasn't eaten yet. Please allow this subordinate to leave first and prepare some other fresh food to persuade her." Left alone in the carriage, Xiahou Qing stretched out his hand but didn't catch anything. He couldn't help but laugh involuntarily. He really didn't misjudge Juicy. However, even his most loyal subordinate had learned to rebel. What should he do? Yesterday it was raining heavily, and today it was sunny again. The weather was a bit stuffy, but there were no clouds for thousands of miles. The journey to the human world wasn't in vain. Chapter 525. Because he was worried that Ning Shu had not recovered and Xiahou Qing was poisoned, he stopped and walked for 3 days on the way back to the capital. On the first day, Ning Shu did not eat or drink. He did not ask her anything and seemed to have completely forgotten about her. On the second day, Shi Yang hunted a rabbit to roast. She pouted and squatted beside him stubbornly. He turned a deaf ear to her and took the rabbit leg that Shi Yang cut and enjoyed it as if no one was around. Ning Shu looked at him longingly, hoping that he would say a few words to her and persuade her so that she would eat all the rabbit meat in front of her. However, he only slowly wiped his hands after he finished eating and got back into the carriage. On the third day, Ning Shu finally lost her mind due to hunger. She swallowed a mouthful of porridge silently with red eyes. Xiahou Qing finally appeared and said coldly, "Very good." Ning Shu wept bitterly and drank the entire bowl of porridge without saying a word. It was as if she had withered away. Xiao Zhongping quietly pushed Hui Mo. "Hey, what's wrong with your Shizzy and Ning Shu? Did they break up?" These two people were like the same person before. They ate and rested, and Ning Shu refused to leave Xiahou Qing. As long as Ning Shu made a request, Xiahou Qing would not refuse. It was just like how King Ju treated Deji, Juyu treated Bao Sai, and Sima Xiangru treated Zhuo Wenjun in the novel. She was jealous of them. But now, it has only been a few days and everything has changed. Xiao Zhongping was curious for 3 days and finally could not help but ask Hui Mo for gossip. Hui Mo also did not know the inside story. He was as anxious as an ant in a hot pot. He asked his Shizzy several times openly and secretly, but he was always sent away as soon as he opened his mouth. He then went to ask Ju Sai. Ju Sai's mouth was like a sawed-off gourd and he could not get a word out. Could it be that the two of them had a conflict? That didn't seem to be the case. His young master was the most cultured. Moreover, Lady Ning was clear and transparent right now. She only had his young master in her eyes, so there shouldn't be any conflicts. Or perhaps, his Shizzy had given up on Lady Ning. If it was so easy for his heart to turn cold, a few days ago, his young master would not have endured the pain of the poison acting up and braved the rain to save someone. Could it be, looking at Xiao Zhongping's expectant eyes, Huemore felt sour in his heart. He straightened his neck and said, "My Shizzy and Lady Ning have the same mind. How can they break up? If Princess has the time to mind my master's business, why don't you think about how to deal with His Majesty and the Empress when you enter the capital later?" Hui Mo always has a soft temper. But this time, he just turns around and leaves without saying goodbye. Xiao Zhongping is completely confused. How dare you? Hong Fei, look, there are no good men. He dares to be rude to me. He knows that I won't have a good ending when I return to the palace, but he doesn't come to give me any advice. He even laughs at me. It seems that he was just pretending to be obedient to me before. He's just flattering me. I'm so angry. I'm so angry. The master of this Nanping mansion is a bastard, and so are the guards. Hong Fei, get on the carriage with me. After I return to the palace, if I talk to anyone in the Nanping mansion again, my name is not Xiao Zhongping. Looking at Xiao Zhongping, who was flustered and exasperated, Hong Fei silently followed and served her. She also took a fan and fanned for her to cool down. What she doesn't dare to say in her heart is, "My princess, you have been infatuated with Xiahou Shizhi for so many years. Can't you see this clearly? That little guard clearly misunderstands that you still care about Xiahou Shizhi and hope that they will separate so that you can take advantage of the situation. So he is jealous. Also, you have never taken a little guard seriously before. Now you are scolding him together with your master's guard. You clearly take it to heart, but you just don't realize it." Hong Fei was carefully selected by old Princess Yu and arranged to serve Xiao Zhongping for many years. She naturally knows Xiao Zhongping's character like the back of her hand. However, even if she understands it, she won't say it out loud. Because a little guard of the mansion, without rank, no family background, and no parents, what future does a princess of the same country have? No. So just let it be there. Chapter 526. 3 days were neither too long nor too short, and they passed by very quickly. Shi Yang, who was leading the way, reined in his horse and shouted, "Stop," before stopping at the city gate. Sure enough, it was different from the past. The city gate was heavily guarded, and there were twice as many guards as before. It was enough to show how tense the situation in the city was. They planned to hide their tracks and quietly return to the capital, so they deliberately divided into 2 groups. Shi Yang guarded Xiahou Qing and Ning Shu in the front, and Huemore guarded Xiao Zhongping in the back. Unexpectedly, someone recognized them as soon as they appeared at the city gate. Look, isn't that the heir of Xiahou's carriage? Although it's not as luxurious as the carriage of the prince's mansion, the guards on both sides are majestic. It can't be anyone other than the guards of the Prince of Nanping. I think so too. The rumors are right. Heir Xiahou has returned to the capital. The one sitting in the carriage behind must be Duke Ning's famous eldest daughter, Ning Shu. Come and see. Come and see. The people at the city gate quickly gathered. Some of them were not in a hurry to leave the city and stood aside to watch the show. In the carriage, Xiahou Qing secretly frowned and rubbed his fingers back and forth. In the crowd, Tan Siwei, who did not have time to take off his official robe, squeezed out as a spectator. He greeted the guards at the city gate and personally went to the front of the carriage to welcome them. Heir Xiaohou, you've had a hard journey. I specially came to welcome you. Xiaohou Qing ordered Ju Sai to lift the curtain and welcome Tan Siwei into the carriage. He was too lazy to be mysterious. He directly hung the token of the Prince of Nanping and drove the carriage into the city. Like a spark falling into dry grass, the news of Ning Shu, the eldest daughter of the Ning family, came back from the dead, and Xiaohou Qing, the heir of the Prince of Nanping, suddenly returned to the capital, spread through the streets and alleys. In the crowd, Tian Wen silently pulled down the straw hat on his head and walked into the deep alley with a load on his shoulder. In the carriage, Xiaohou Qing and Tan Siwei sat opposite each other. Xiaohou Qing nodded slightly. Thank you for waiting, Xiaoqing Tan. However, in just a few days, Tan Siwei, who once had a baby face, lost his childishness in a very short period of time after leaving the guidance and protection of his father and brother. His chin slowly sharpened, his personality became more mature, and his eyes became more steady and resolute. However, there was one thing that did not change, and that was the determination in his bones that he would rather die than live in dishonor. No, Tan Siwei hurriedly corrected himself. Miss Shu was in danger that day, and I was so incompetent that I didn't know about it at all. Fortunately, Heir Xiaohou risked his life to save her. Otherwise, I can't imagine how she would be now. I admit that I do like Miss Shu, but after a series of incidents, I have to admit that Heir Xiaohou's ability is beyond my reach. I'm sincerely convinced. When he heard the news of Ning Shu's sudden death, he was busy every day in grief. When he finally realized that something was wrong, it was already 2 days later when Commandery Princess Xin was imprisoned and the city was in chaos. He suddenly woke up and wanted to go out of the city to save her, but when he looked up, he didn't know where to go. It wasn't until a few days later when he received Xiaohou Qing's secret letter that he felt relieved. Previously, he had been furious because Shu had chosen Xiaohou Qing and not him. Now, he finally admitted it. In this world, only the man in front of him had the ability to protect Shu. He was indeed not as good as him. However, Tan Siwei frowned and muttered, but I really don't know what Heir Xiaohou meant in the letter. Chapter 527. With the appearance of the fourth plum blossom petal, Xiaohou Qing's poison acted up more and more frequently. He clearly felt as if there were ants and insects in his organs eating his flesh piece by piece, making him unable to sleep at night. At the same time, he also clearly felt that the hearing he had painstakingly cultivated after losing his sight was gradually being eaten away. He knew that there was not much time left for him. In the near future, maybe half a year, maybe 3 months, or maybe only 30 to 50 days, he would have to bid farewell to the world in the most embarrassing manner in the world. Incense was burning in the carriage and the smoke curled into blurred shapes in the air. Behind the white smoke, Xiaohou Qing's porcelain-like face was expressionless. He said lightly, "Nothing. I just want to ask if Tan Xiaoqing still wants to marry Xiaoshu." Tan Siwei was even more confused. If he had not heard Xiaohou Qing say this with his own ears, he would have thought that he was dreaming. Although he did not understand, he saw that Xiaohou Qing's expression was very serious and did not seem to be joking. So he lowered his eyes and shook his head. "Of course I think about it day and night and look forward to it, but," Xiaohou Qing immediately interrupted him. "No buts. Let me ask you again. If Xiaoshu is in danger again, are you willing to do your best to protect her?" "Of course I am willing. But my ability is not as good as yours. I am afraid that I will not be able to do it like this time. I only want to ask you, to the best of your ability, can you treat her like your own life, like your own eyes, and be willing to stand in front of her, block all dangers for her, and ensure that she can live out her life safely and smoothly?" Tan Siwei looked at him in astonishment. Looking at his bloodless face wrapped in the cloak, some kind of speculation suddenly surged in his heart. He subconsciously pressed on the small table and half stood up in surprise. "Xiaohou Shizi, could it be that you..." Xiaohou Qing suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were as bright as stars, but he couldn't see anything clearly. It was as if a ball of fire was burning directly into Tan Siwei's heart. "Everything else has nothing to do with you. I'm only giving you this one chance. If you have any hesitation in your heart, then let's forget about this matter. In the future, you and Xiahou Qing will go your separate ways. The fire in Tan Siwei's heart seemed to have been ignited by his gaze. His limbs and bones were filled with warmth. His heart was still filled with endless confusion, but a hidden desire overwhelmed everything else. This might be his only chance, and also his last chance to get Xu Er. If he missed it, it would be too late for regrets. This fervent desire caused him to grip the chopping board with all his might without even thinking. He said solemnly and urgently, "If the heavens are merciful and give me this opportunity, Tan Sai is willing to die." Xiahou Qing finally got an answer that satisfied him. He curled his lips, clenched his fists, and coughed heavily a few times. He coughed until his lips turned red. After he finished coughing, his face became more transparent. He suppressed the curve of his lips, closed his eyes and sat quietly for a moment. He raised his hand and waved. "I know. Xiaoqing, please go back. In the future, I'll entrust Xiaoshu to you. I hope you remember what you said today. Otherwise, even if it's a violation of the rules of heaven in the netherworld, I'll still come to you." Hearing the knocking, Ju Sai immediately went in to see the guest out. "Your Highness, what's wrong with your body?" Tan Siwei still had a lot of questions, but Ju Sai had already asked him to go out with a tough attitude. He stood in the middle of Vermilion Bird Avenue and watched the carriage carrying Xiahou Qing leave without raising a cloud of dust. In the carriage following closely behind, Ning Xu lifted the corner of the curtain and looked at him curiously. Before he could open his mouth to say a word to her, the carriage was already far away. Chapter 528. Since their whereabouts had been exposed, there was no need to hide anymore. Xiahou Qing ordered everyone to change back into the bodyguard uniform of the Wang mansion and returned to the Wang mansion. Hui Mo led another group of people to escort Xiao Zhongping back to the palace. Ning Xu had been tormented for 3 days. She was exhausted and fell asleep in the carriage. Zigui was still injured and couldn't carry her out. So he looked at Xiahou Qing for help and pulled Xiyang to speak for her. "Shizi, Lady Ning is asleep. We are afraid of offending her. Why don't you?" She didn't expect Xiahou Qing to ignore her. With Juice's support, he got off the carriage and turned to walk into the manor. He said coldly, "Go summon Fang Mema. If one maidservant can't carry her, then 2 or 3. There's always a way to carry her inside. If she really can't be carried, then wake her up and go back to sleep. I have something important to do. If you don't inform me, don't disturb me." After he said that, he really didn't care anymore. He turned and disappeared behind the wall without a trace of nostalgia. Not long after, Fang Mema stood in front of the carriage with a group of maids and began to do business. Zigui only hated that his tongue was broken and he couldn't speak. He was so angry that he stepped on Xiyang's foot. "Oh!" Xiyang cried out, but since his master was in the wrong, his subordinate was implicated. No matter how wronged he felt, he had no choice but to shed a tear of sympathy for himself. When the tear was full, he swallowed it back down, and let his last cry of grief. Tianwen was already waiting in the hall. When he saw Xiahou Qing, he bent down and helped him to sit down. Then he closed the door. "Shizi, yesterday evening, the news of you and Lady Ning returning to the capital began to spread in the city. We couldn't stop it. I couldn't find the source who deliberately spread the news. I think that when we were secretly searching for the news of that person's eyes were always on us. She may have had 2 purposes in doing so. 1, to let us know that she knew where we were, and that she had everything under her control. The other, to announce that she was ready to strike this time. I think that Shizi's return to the capital will not be peaceful. Perhaps this is not the best time." He had not returned for several days, unaware that the little orioles on the bird perch outside the hall had finally returned. One by one, the tender yellow balls scrambled to get into the window lattice and landed on his shoulder and the back of his hand. Xiahou Qing picked up the one that loved to act spoiled the most. He gently placed it in the palm of his hand and felt the warm vitality of this little creature. She has been hiding for many years and has finally shown herself. Furthermore, She has turned the capital upside down. Now that she is about to reveal her trump card, the conspiracy that has been surrounding me all these years will also surface. If this is not the best time, then there is no other time. So, I not only come back, but also meet that person. How is the situation in the palace now? 3 days ago, His Majesty vomited blood and fainted. All the imperial physicians went to the palace to attend to him, but none of them returned. There are rumors that His Majesty is in danger. Fourth Prince Xiao Yunsu brought people to break into the palace but failed. The officials were also stopped outside the hall by Empress Cao for fear of disturbing the emperor's rest. Now, other than Empress Cao, no one else can enter to visit. The court and the harem are talking about it. As for the 3 children in the city, they are still missing. A severed finger fell from the sky in the imperial mausoleum of the late emperor. Minister Tan Shaoqing brought people to take a look. It belongs to Heaven's Inquisition wanted to say something but hesitated. Chapter 529. After Tian Wen finished his report, Shaoqing fell into deep thought for a long time. The door creaked open and Fang Mama bowed as she came in. Your Highness, Miss Ning has been settled. Hearing her name, Shaoqing's fingertips moved, causing the little bird that was rubbing against his palm to suspiciously tilt its little head. Then he heard its master use a restrained voice to say, when she got off the carriage, did she cry? When this old servant brought the maidservants to get her off the carriage, the first thing she asked when she woke up was where Your Highness was. After this old servant told her the truth, her face showed disappointment, but she didn't cry. She just made a sound and then followed this old servant into the side hall to bathe and change her clothes. That's good. Shaoqing's expression was distant, as if they were separated by thousands of miles of clouds. He gave a low laugh. In this world, there is no one who can't live without someone. Ning Shu is not unable to live without Shaoqing. After experiencing so much disappointment, she will become numb. In the future, she will become more and more used to living without me. This is very good, very good. After he finished speaking, Shaoqing suddenly lowered his neck and coughed twice. Fang Mama quickly took a handkerchief to serve him, but when she saw the dazzling red color on the snow-white handkerchief, she was shocked. Even the little bird was scared away by the dazzling sweet smell. Fang Mama said, Your Highness, Shaoqing was used to it and didn't take it to heart. It's no big deal. Go tell the small kitchen to prepare a few dishes that she likes to eat and send them over. She has been throwing tantrums for the past few days and hasn't had a good meal. She should be able to eat today. You guys watch from the side and don't let her eat too much. Her stomach can't take it. That's right, add 2 more dishes that don't suit her taste and send them over. Don't let her think too much. Don't forget to boil the medicine she drinks on time and send it over. In short, Fang Mima, I'll leave her to you. Fang Mima had watched him grow up. For a moment, her heart felt like it was being twisted by a knife. She couldn't hide her grief. Your Highness, what are you saying? This is this old servant's duty. But why does Your Highness want to do this? Although the poison is overbearing, it's not impossible to cure it. Didn't they hear that the young master of Imperial Censor Yun had come back to life a few days ago? Now, he's studying and cultivating in his hometown. Your Highness, you will definitely get better. Shaoqing was non-committal. He changed the topic and asked, have you ever fished before? Fang Mama didn't understand what she meant. She turned around and wiped her tears. I've fished once or twice. Shaoqing nodded. Anyone who has fished before knows that if you want a fish to take the bait, you have to prepare the freshest fishworms and then release the long line. After a long and patient wait, you can catch the big fish in your mind. This seemed simple, but in reality, it was extremely difficult. Sometimes, if one was unlucky, they might waste an entire day and still not gain anything. People who didn't know how to fish often couldn't see these. They only saw the delicious live fish in the fisherman's urn. They were envious, so they also learned to fish. To me, the fact that the cloud leaf's poison has been cured is like the fish that someone else caught. It was also the only light in the dark night, leading me to chase after it with hope. But in reality, I had already become the fish that someone else put out the bait to catch, and I didn't know. Now that I know, I won't let that person play with me anymore. Perhaps there was another antidote in this world that could cure the kiss of the plum blossom, but she had carefully planned it for 11 years, so she wouldn't easily hand it over. Rather than being grabbed by the throat and becoming someone else's captive, it would be better for me to break it myself. Therefore, there is no need to think about the antidote. Before I die, my only wish is to solve all the mysteries. Cough, cough. Fang Mama, you watched me grow up, so you know me. There is no need to persuade me. Fang Mama was helpless against his stubbornness. She knew that if she forced him to put down his dignity, it would be a punishment worse than death. She could only quietly shed a few more tears. She turned around and went out to take care of Ning Shu. As soon as she opened the door, she heard a commotion outside. She frowned and said, "What's going on? Don't you know that His Highness is resting in the hall?" The one who came to report was a guard. His face was full of panic as he loudly reported, "It's people from the palace. They came to pass on the Empress' imperial decree to immediately summon Duke Ning Shu into the palace. If there is any delay, the punishment will be increase." This subordinate told them that Lady Ning was injured. As a result, the eunuch said, "There is no excuse. Even if she is injured or dead, she must be carried into the palace to see Feng Yang." Chapter 530. Xiahou Qing, the heir of Prince Nanping, greets the Empress. The cold candles in the Phoenix Algae Palace flickered, and her gaze was like a blade. Empress Cao sat upright on the Phoenix chair, her hand supporting her forehead. She looked with a faint smile at Xiahou Qing, who had come uninvited, and Ning Shu, who was behind him, wearing a cloak, who was nervously restraining herself. After pondering for a long time, she said slowly, "I remember that I only invited the Ning family's girl into the palace to chat with me. Why is heir Xiahou also interested in coming? Could it be that after not seeing each other for a few days, you remembered to pay your respects to me? That's really considerate of you." Xiahou Qing also smiled and said, "Your Majesty is the mother of the world and in charge of all matters in the palace. Recently, you have worked hard to take care of His Majesty's body. Your Majesty is for the country and the people. I am unable to relieve Your Majesty's worries because of my disability. In addition, Your Majesty has been working hard recently and I'm afraid that your mind is restless. Your Majesty has been ill for a long time. I specially offer you 100-year-old ginseng. I hope Your Majesty will kindly accept it." The Empress seemed to be in a good mood and joked with him, "You are indeed a considerate and polite child. I still remember when you were brought into the palace by the old prince for the first time. I saw that you were extraordinary. Whether it was your appearance, character, or intelligence, you are outstanding among the younger generation of the royal family. What's even more rare is that you are modest and not arrogant at such a young age. You know when to advance and retreat, you are steady and generous, and you can keep your composure. I only hate that my body was damaged after giving birth to the first prince and I can no longer have children. Otherwise, if you were born in my womb, it would be my great fortune. What a pity, what a pity. Now that you have paid your respects, I will accept this ginseng. Thank you for your trouble. I still have some personal things to say to the Ning family's girl. It is inconvenient for others to be present. Heir of Prince Xiahou, please go first. Cai Bin, send the heir out for me." Cai Bin immediately stepped forward, "Your Highness, this way please." Xiahou Qing stopped smiling and pursed his thin lips. He didn't move. The coldness in Empress Cao's eyes became even sharper as she curled her lips with interest. Cai Bin still had a lingering fear and reminded him again, "Prince Xiahou, it's late. You're a man and it's not appropriate for you to stay in the harem for too long. Please leave." Xiahou Qing remained motionless. On the jade steps, she looked at him with a smile. He stood in front of Ning Shu, as steady as Mount Tai. Neither of them spoke, as if they were in a silent confrontation. On this hot summer day, Cai Bao's back was drenched in cold sweat. She knew that her life would be in danger if she couldn't complete the Empress's order. So, she put on a cold face and pressed the soft sword at her waist. Prince Xiaoho, don't forget that this is the imperial harem of the imperial city. It is the Empress's bedroom, not your Nanping mansion. If you insist on refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, don't blame us for being disrespectful. The cold light of the soft sword was about to appear. Ju Sai silently took a step forward, his eyes like an eagle's. Xiaoho Qing didn't budge an inch. He pulled Ning Shu behind him and said in a low voice, "Today I came with her, so I'm going to take her out with me. Your Majesty, please enlighten me." Empress Cao couldn't help but clap her hands and laugh. "Haha, look. I just praised you for being calm and composed. I didn't expect that you couldn't hold it in after a while. You're still a young man, proud and arrogant. It's just that." After the Empress finished laughing, her face suddenly turned cold. She slapped the phoenix chair and said angrily, "I only asked her to stay for a few idle words. Are you afraid that I'll harm her? Xiaoho Qing, how dare you?" That kind of pressure and that kind of anger made even Ju Sai, who was used to the battlefield, feel his throat stop and his heart tighten. He truly felt that the Empress, who was almost 50 years old, had a graceful appearance, and was used to smiling in front of others, was so terrifying. It wasn't hard to imagine what would happen to those who dared to offend her. Hearing that the Empress was furious, a row of palace maids immediately gathered in a well-trained manner and surrounded the three people. The scene was on the verge of erupting. Ning Shu was injured, and Xiaoho Qing's poison had flared up. Only Ju Sai could fight. There was no chance of victory if he fought one against many. Ju Sai's mind raced as he desperately tried to think of a way to use his life to ensure that the heir apparent could safely leave the palace. He heard Xiaoho Qing slowly open his mouth and say, "Neither servile nor overbearing, Your Majesty has been forced into a difficult situation this time. It's as if a sword is hanging over your head. My insistence on staying is not to offend you, but to help Your Majesty. If Your Majesty isn't willing to accept my kindness, you can cut off my head to appease the anger in your heart. I am a person who is about to die. I just don't know if Your Majesty is willing to part with this great world." Chapter 531. Everyone thought that Xiaoho Qing, the Crown Prince of Nanping, was like a broken blade that had sunk into the sand after being blinded. He was no longer as glorious as he used to be. All they could see was the bleakness on his lonely scabbard. Who would have thought that once the scabbard was pulled open, the broken iron was reforged and the silver blade inside was sharper than before? Empress Cao's face darkened. She picked up the cloak and walked down the jade step by step until she was in front of Xiaoho Qing. She narrowed her eyes and said, "Are you threatening Ben Gong?" In front of Xiaoho Qing's eyes was still that black embroidered brocade. On the surrounding golden pillars that reached the sky, cranes bowed their heads with red wax in their mouths. When they shone on Xiaoho Qing's face, it was calm and steady, like an unmoving jade mountain that had stood for thousands of years. "Empress is wrong. Qing is making plans for Empress." The Empress was dressed in a golden phoenix robe, and was exceptionally dazzling in this magnificent palace. With the help of the palace servants, she seemed to be playing around in front of Xiaoho Qing and Ning Shu. "What a plan. You and this girl of the Ning family are indeed fated. Even your words are on the same side. You say that I was forced into a dilemma. How come I didn't know?" Xiaoho Qing slowly said, "Empress knows and feels deeply. That's why you hurriedly summoned Ning Shu into the palace as soon as you received the news that we had returned to the capital. It was to solve Empress' urgent situation, wasn't it? Although Qing hasn't been in the capital recently, I have heard of what happened. Starting with the book in the fish belly and the female lead, Han Wang, to the collapse of the Imperial Mausoleum and the Lotus Bloodletter, and then the disappearance of the children in the city and the reappearance of the Bloodletter. Everything seemed to be directed at the eldest princess and Duke Ning, but in reality, the true goal was you, Empress. Empress Nyang Nyang, you probably have two purposes for summoning Ning Shu into the palace tonight. First, you suspect that this is all because Princess He Xin has been imprisoned and is in danger. In order to save themselves, Duke Ning's Fu has directed another play and dragged Empress Nyang Nyang into the fire in an attempt to use an even bigger disaster to avoid their punishment. And these days, you tried every possible way to make Princess He-Shin tell the truth, so when you heard that Ning Shu was not dead, you became angry and wanted to detain her. You wanted to use Princess He-Shin's most beloved daughter to pry open her mouth and punish her to vent the anger in your heart. Secondly, you know Ning Shu's ability very well. That day when the Imperial Mausoleum collapsed, the Blood Lotus fell from the sky. In fact, this kind of unimaginable strange thing, although it sounds mysterious and can cause people to be lost in fanciful thoughts, to the majority of the people, as long as it doesn't affect their lives, it's just another topic to talk about after a meal. After passing it on, there will be a day when it stops. Nyang Nyang has many capable people at her side, so she naturally has a way to deal with this. But what no one expected was that 3 children were lost in the capital, instantly touching the pain of the people's skin. This made this matter turn from a strange story into a huge mess. Although Qing's eyes were busy, she could see that although the capital looked like it was under control and no one was rioting, the inside was already a mess. The officials were disloyal, the people were boiling, and the princes were restless. A great change in the country could happen at any time. It could happen sooner or later, but it was unavoidable. No one knows better than you that if this case continues to happen, the grievances of one person will become the grievances of 100, 1,000, 10,000 people. When that time comes, even if Nyang Nyang has the ability of a martial emperor, it will be difficult to reverse the situation. If you want to control the situation as quickly as possible, there is only one way: solve the case of the missing children and use the grievances of the people to clear Nyang Nyang's name, and the only person who can help Nyang Nyang is Ning Shu, there is no one else. Chapter 532. Cao, who had always known that Xiahou Qing was extremely intelligent, but when all her thoughts were exposed, she still couldn't help but feel a little scared. In an instant, a hidden killing intent rose from the bottom of her heart. If such a person was allowed to exist in this world, if he went against her in the future, it would be a great disaster. It was better to get rid of him as soon as possible and get rid of all future troubles. However, this killing intent only flashed for a moment and was quickly suppressed by her because she knew that this was not the best time. So she stopped and a cold laugh came from the bottom of her throat. She casually took a phoenix hairpin from her complicated hair bun and played with it in her hand. Xiahou Shizi, even if you are right, so what? That's exactly what I'm planning to do. Don't tell me you're going to stop me. In order to save themselves, the Ning family dared to extend their hands to me, causing the current situation. So what if I kill the entire Duke's manor? If Ning Shu is obedient and plays this show with me to solve the case of the missing children, maybe I can leave her mother's body intact. If she is not willing, then let her hold her 5-year-old brother's body and die with him. As expected, the Empress didn't plan to let Ning Shu walk out of this palace door in one piece from the beginning. Xiahou Qing's face tightened, and he spoke faster. It was like a jade hammer striking against a bell, and his voice was deafening. Have you ever thought that this case wasn't done by the Ning family? Instead, it's a trap that's been painstakingly planned to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. Using one person's life and the safety of 3 children to plot against 4 forces. Even if the Ning clan really had the guts to do this, by choosing to frame the imperial concubine, not only would they not be able to resolve their current situation, they would instead add another enemy that the Ning clan could not contend against. Even the stupidest person in the world would not choose to do such a suicidal thing. So, Your Highness, you have fallen into a trap. The person who framed you wasn't the Ning family, but your common enemy. As Xiahou Qing spoke, he judged Cao Hu's reaction. From her sudden stop in her breathing, he could tell that she had clearly heard his words. He then continued, that person is like a spider weaving a web in a cave, silently pulling all of you into his monstrous web. In this series of big cases, King Ku, Princess Royal, the Ning family, and the Empress, the mother of the world, none of them benefited. They were all losers. In the end, they made you suspect each other. A book in the belly of a fish killed Princess Royal's only bloodline, and put Princess He-Shin in prison. Then they used your hand to crush the Ning family, and then used the world's hand to crush you. All of this was linked, like the sandpiper and the clam fighting, and only the fisherman would benefit. Niang Niang, I implore you to reconsider. You must not fall into that person's evil scheme. When Xiahou Qing finished speaking, the phoenix hairpin in Cao Hu's hand dropped and fell to the ground with a bang. The palace servants hurriedly bent over to pick it up. Then, they heard Empress Cao, who had always been graceful and powerful, reveal a voice that bordered on fear for the first time. How is this possible? She's already dead. She suddenly raised her head and took another step forward. She glared at Xiahou Qing with a gaze that was as sharp as needles. Gritting her teeth, she said, Xiahou Qing, don't think that just because you have a glib tongue, this empress will believe you. If you want to say that we have a common enemy, then there is only one person. However, that person has long been turned into a pile of charcoal. Even the immortals can't save her. This empress and His Majesty personally went to examine her corpse. There is no possibility of it being stolen. Chapter 533. Empress Cao's momentary loss of self-control was like a ray of light leaking from a dark cloud in the sky. It had just appeared when it was hurriedly covered. She stopped talking and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the fear and trepidation had been completely suppressed. She turned and walked back to the splendid phoenix chair without saying a word. However, someone as sharp as Xiahou Qing still caught the tail of the light. He didn't make a sound and didn't release it. The hall fell into a short silence until a lamp silently burned out. The flame flickered and the palace maids immediately came forward to add candles. Empress Cao finally looked up and waved at the palace maids. Are you all blind? Xiahou Shizi has been in the palace for a long time. Why hasn't the tea been served? Xiahou Shizi, you don't look well. Have you been feeling unwell recently? Your health has not been good since you were young. You have made me very worried. Come, quickly give me a seat. The tense atmosphere dissipated in an instant. Xiahou Qing also smiled and bowed. Thank you, Your Highness, for your concern. It's not serious. That's good. Empress Cao nodded in relief. She also took a cup of tea from a palace maid. She lifted the lid and gently slid the tea over the rim of the cup. She didn't drink it. Instead, she sighed and said, I won't hide it from Shizi. Since the beginning of this case, this empress has suffered a disaster from the heavens for no reason. This empress has been worried and uneasy. I didn't expect that even His Majesty was so angry that he became seriously ill. It seems that I have the upper hand at the moment. In fact, the undercurrent in the palace has been turbulent and greedy, ready to swallow me alive at any time. As far as the eye can see, there is no one to help me. Only Xiahou Shizi is willing to help me. I am deeply moved. Then, in your opinion, what can I do to break out of my current predicament? Solve the case, Xiahou Qing said straightforwardly. Empress Cao put down her teacup and rubbed her temples. She sighed and said, Shizi's words are easy to say. Since the case was launched, all the soldiers in the city were mobilized and almost turned the entire capital upside down. However, after nearly 10 days, there was no result. On the contrary, the rumors in the marketplace became even more rampant. Empress Cao's eyes fell on Ning Shu, who had been wearing a cloak and keeping her head lowered. I thought I could count on this girl. She has made great contributions to His Majesty in the previous cases, and I have a whole new level of respect for her. But now, her tone was light and sarcastic, as if she was looking at a bird with broken wings. No matter how brave and good a horse is, if its legs are crippled, it will still have the strength to fight. I seem to have heard that this girl is not as good as she used to be. Her words were sharp. Obviously, she had already received news that Ning Shu's mind was damaged. And Ning Shu obviously couldn't gain her trust. I can. Just as Empress Cao finished speaking, Ning Shu, who had been standing in silence and looking around blankly, suddenly raised her head. The hat covering her head slipped off. Her voice was as soft as jade, but it was powerful and resonant. It was like a cluster of slender orchids that would never break. Empress Cao looked at her with some surprise. She narrowed her eyes and looked up and down suspiciously. You can really? I can. Ning Shu repeated. She fearlessly met her knife-like gaze. Empress Cow smiled. She suddenly stood up. The peonies embroidered with gold thread on her body were impudently and overbearingly piercing into Ning Shu's eyes under the candlelight. Good. Ning Shu, listen well. This is a trap. They are plotting against your Ning family, plotting against me, and plotting against the entire imperial court, and even the Great Yu's 9 provinces and 16 prefectures. In at most 10 days, I want you to investigate this case for me as soon as possible. If you can help me smoothly pass this tribulation, I will not only guarantee your mother's safety, but I will also guarantee your entire family's safety. I will also guarantee that you will have a smooth career and will never have to worry about anything. Otherwise, I will have no choice but to bear the pain and let your entire Ning family be loyal to me. Chapter 534. The heavy vermilion gate of the Phoenix Algae Palace opened and closed. It had only been an hour, but it seemed to have been half a lifetime. Ju Sai helped Xiahou Qing out of the high threshold. His back was already soaked in cold sweat. When they were finally far away from the richly ornamented but seemingly man-eating palace, Ju Sai whispered, "Young master, who was the person the Empress was referring to just now?" The summer night was full of stars, and the sky was full of stars. Xiahou Qing walked down the steps with Ju Sai's help. Behind him, the hundreds of millions of fireflies seemed to be chasing him. His skin was so pale that it seemed like it would disperse at any time under the starlight. She has been dead for many years. A piece of charcoal, worthy of the Emperor and the Empress's personal inspection. Many years later, when I think of her name, Empress Cow will be frightened. There is only one such person in 25 years. He raised his fingertips and gently wrote a word on Ju Sai's elbow. Ju. Ju Sai almost cried out in surprise. His heart was in turmoil. He lowered his voice and said, "But that person has long ascended to immortality. Even if she had the ability to steal from heaven, she was lucky enough to survive. Now that many years have passed, she has long become an old and decrepit person. The person who confronted us in the rainy night obviously doesn't match. Perhaps it was a descendant of the Ju family? In the past 20 years, the court had never stopped strangling the descendants of the Ju family. The century-old giant family disappeared overnight. Even if there were a few broken branches and withered leaves, they could only hide in the deep mountains and old forests and beg for food in the shabby alleys. That was why there was the case of Ju Yu Zhao sneaking into the palace and pretending to be concubine Wan. So it didn't make sense. Xiahou Qing stretched out his palm and motioned for Ju Sai to hand over the bamboo stick. If I am right, the other party has been planning for many years. The last move is finally about to be made. At that time, whether it is a human or a ghost, we will know at a glance. What we need to do is to be patient." Ju Sai clasped his hands and bowed. Yes. He blindly followed behind and watched as his Shizi Yi tapped his bamboo cane lightly, testing the road ahead step by step. He turned around and looked at Ning Shu, who had been walking quietly behind him. After following him for a long time, she bit her lower lip and finally mustered up her courage. She lifted her skirt and ran over, running behind the crown prince. Ju slowed down his pace and kept a distance between them while looking around. On the long palace road, Ning Shu obediently stepped on his shadow, walking step by step. The 2 rows of fairy palace lanterns by the roadside emitted a warm orange light, sticking their shadows together and then separated, and then stuck together again. Every time they were together, Ning Shu would be secretly happy, but every time they were apart, she would be depressed. If it was before, she would not have any misgivings. If she wanted to throw herself at him and talk to him, she would. But after these few days of indifference, she suddenly felt timid. She was like a little rabbit that had been doted on by its master but was suddenly thrown to the side. Her heart was filled with endless loneliness. After being followed for a long time and becoming impatient, Xiahou Qing finally stopped and spoke first. "What is it?" Ning Shu wasn't paying attention and almost bumped into his back. Xiahou Qing's fingers moved, but in the end, he didn't reach out. He squeezed it tightly into his sleeve and didn't say a word as he waited for her to respond. Ning Shu finally steadied herself after being flustered for a while. She looked at him expectantly. Just now, thank you for protecting me. Even though her mind was still a mess, she still had her reason. She could see that just now in the hall, when the Empress wanted to kill her, he had protected her. Xiahou Qing turned his head and calmly said, I said before that we are allies and we use each other. If you were hurt, it would not be a good thing for me. So, helping you is helping myself. There is no need to be polite. His simple words caused the light in Ning Shu's eyes to dim. Chapter 535. Ning Shu became anxious and tried hard to recall. But just now Xiahou Qing let out a chuckle, as if laughing at her own wishful thinking. You want to say that I almost fell out with the Empress for you? You think too much. It's true that I did have the intention to protect you for the sake of our alliance, but it was more to deliberately provoke the Empress and find out some unknown secrets from her mouth. At the same time, I used her hand for us to gather all the power possible to find out the enemy who plotted against me. As for you, it's just a favor. Don't think too much. You should know that I'm the king of southern peace. I've enjoyed extraordinary glory and splendor since the founding of the country. Later, in order to avoid the wind, I asked for a demotion and guarded Yunyang State alone. However, no one can shake the unparalleled glory of our king's mansion. As the only heir of the king of southern peace, I should marry someone in the future. Even if it's not a princess, it should at least be a princess. Lady Ning, please no. Ning Shu was stunned for a moment. She wanted to put on a smiling face, but she couldn't for a long time. She could only nod and shake her head stupidly. Ah. Oh, okay, I know. Xiahou Qing's palms trembled violently in his sleeves. He raised his head and inhaled a mouthful of hot air. How do you feel now? Ning Shu said gloomily, I'm quite good. Xiahou Qing said, in that case, you should return to the Duke's mansion. Being closer to your family will help you recover your memory sooner. If you encounter something I can help with during the investigation, send someone to inform me. After all, we're an alliance that benefits each other. Juicy, we should have reached the palace gate in front, right? Juicy stepped forward and followed. Yes, there's still more than 10 feet. Xiahou Qing coughed softly and said in a businesslike manner, we came in 2 carriages. I don't feel well. Accompany me back to the mansion first. Leave 2 people to send Lady Ning off. Her personal bodyguard should also be sent back to the House of Duke later. There are too many eyes in the imperial residence. Ju Sai glanced at Ning Shu's expression. The light in his eyes swirled like a pool of water, but in the end, he couldn't say anything. He bowed and answered, yes. He helped Xiahou Qing out of the palace and into the carriage. The carriage carried Xiahou Qing away leisurely without the slightest bit of reluctance, leaving Ning Shu alone behind in the Vermilion Palace gate. Ning Shu subconsciously took a step forward, but she forced herself to stop. Her long eyelashes fluttered as she hugged herself and squatted on the ground. In the carriage, Xiahou Qing clenched his fists, forcing himself not to be soft-hearted and not to hesitate. That was why he didn't order the carriage to stop. The edge of the finger bone in his palm pierced deeply into his flesh. He used the pain to help him keep his mind clear. He leaned against the carriage and said hoarsely, leave 2/3 of the men behind to protect her. If there's even the slightest movement, immediately report to me. Ju Sai withdrew his gaze and said in a low voice, 2/3? Isn't that too much? Right now, Lord Murong has also fallen into a trap. Someone can harm you at any time. With just a few subordinates, we cannot guarantee your safety. Lord Murong's heart is tied to Miss Ning, this subordinate can understand, but you completely disregard your own safety. Forgive this subordinate for not being able to agree. My safety, Xiahou Qing said self-deprecatingly. Ju Sai, you're thinking too much. The 4th plum blossom petal on my neck didn't come earlier or later. It just had to appear now. This is already the biggest threat to me. In this world, other than it, what else can hurt me? Therefore, even if I set up an impenetrable defense around me, when it's time to die, no one can stop me. It's a waste to leave these men by my side. However, if they stay by her side, when I feel at ease, I might be able to live a day or two longer. Ju Sai, do you also want to disobey me? Heir apparent. Ju Sai lowered his head and struggled, but in the end, he couldn't dissuade him. He summoned the head of the imperial bodyguards and ordered them to hide their tracks and protect Ning Shu. After the arrangements were completed, Xiahou Qing finally leaned against the cushion in exhaustion. His voice was hoarse as he asked, "Did she cry just now?" Ju Sai was silent for a moment before saying, "It seems like she cried." Xiahou Qing rolled up his sleeves and coughed heavily, coughing up a mouthful of blood. Ju Sai hurriedly went to follow his heart. Xiahou Qing brushed his sleeves carelessly and looked at a place behind him that he couldn't see for a long time. He stared until the moon was cold and the stars were sparse. Only then did he mock and hurt himself. She's not someone who likes to cry. She's usually not afraid of anything and is braver than a tiger in the mountains. I didn't expect that the person who made her cry in the end would be me. Chapter 536. Inside the palace, on the high platform behind Ning Shu, a man in a scarlet cloak looked at her curled-up figure. The veins on the back of his clenched fists popped out. He could no longer suppress himself and slammed the railing, turning to go down the steps. A masked woman wearing a guard's armor suddenly appeared and reached out to stop him. "Your Highness, you can't go over. Could it be that you've forgotten what Her Highness told you?" Xiao Yuni looked down and glared at her coldly, as if he wanted to tear her apart. "You also stopped me like this the night she got into trouble. Now you want to use the same reason to stop me again? Get out of my way." Fail Wan was pushed away and hit the railing heavily. She did not bother to check her injuries and knelt on the stone steps in front of him. She stretched out her hands and said sincerely, "You can ignore Her Majesty's advice, but what about your throne? Don't you want it anymore? You have endured hardships for nearly 20 years and finally have the opportunity today. Now that His Majesty is in danger and the Empress is in a difficult situation, she is afraid to take action. She has no children and you are her last chess piece to protect herself. When the situation is desperate, she has only one way, that is to put you on the throne in exchange for her safety. So you can't go down. Not only can you not go down to see Ning Shu, you can't do anything. Don't help her. The more chaotic the situation is, the more you are helping yourself. Your Highness the Sixth Prince, for so many years, only Fail Wan understands your ambition, your ability, and the thousands of grievances in your heart. Fail Wan cannot watch you make a mistake and regret it in the future. Also, Miss Ning doesn't have you in her heart. Even if you go down to see her, it won't help." Before Fail Wan finished speaking, hatred flashed past Xiao Yuni's eyes. He raised his leg and kicked Fail Wan to the side. Fail Wan looked up and spat out a mouthful of blood, but she still climbed up stubbornly and stood in front of Xiao Yuni again. The mask on her face cracked and fell to the ground. Xiahou Qing looked at her familiar face with a cold smile and said with hatred, "It's the same rhetoric again, the same high-sounding bewitchment. That day at the city gate, when I inspected the princess's entourage, I vaguely felt that something was wrong. When the entourage left, I suddenly came to my senses and immediately urged my horse to chase after them. In terms of timing, I was much earlier than that Xiahou Qing. I could have stopped her in time when she was injured, and I could have brought her back first after she was seriously injured. I could have even replaced that blind man by her side to take care of her and cherish her when she collapsed. Finally, I could have regained her trust and brought time back to the past. If I do that, Xiahou Qing will have nothing to do with me. She and I could have started all over again, but you ruined it all. That year, when this prince went out on a campaign to wipe out the bandits, your entire family was killed by the bandits. You were the only survivor. I saw that your appearance was somewhat similar to Shu Er's, so I was moved to love the house and its crow. Thus, I saved your life from the bandits' swords. I didn't keep you because you are you, but because you are like her shadow. When this prince took you in, I told you that your life will belong to me from now on. If necessary, I will let you die in Shu Er's place. However, you had thoughts that you shouldn't have. What? Could it be that you want to replace Shu Er as this prince's princess? You want to be the future Phoenix Master of the Great Yu dynasty? The blood drained from Failwon's face, and her lips trembled violently. 2 streams of tears slid down her face as she said, Your Highness the Sixth Prince, Failwon admits that Failwon does have feelings for you. I know that my body is like grass, and even standing by your side is my greatest wish. However, Failwon had no other choice. That day at the foot of Flame Breath Mountain, I saw with my own eyes that my parents and brothers had their throats slit by the bandits and were hung above the forest of corpses. I saw their blood dripping down like rain, and I saw them reach out to me, wanting me to save them. It was as if they didn't want me to be left alone in this world to be defiled by those beasts. However, I had no other choice. I was like a piece of meat on a chopping board whose limbs were twisted off, allowing those beasts to tear my clothes. I wanted to. At that time, I even had thoughts of dying. I was about to bite my tongue to commit suicide, but it was Your Highness who rode a red horse and wore a scarlet cloak to pierce through that beast's throat. However, I also know that I am just a piece of mud under your feet, a blade of grass on the ground. I am not worthy of you, so I never dared to have such extravagant hopes. The reason I stopped you was not because I had selfish thoughts, but because of you. Chapter 537. It was a snow-white face. Her eyes were mournful, and there were 2 streams of tears. Her facial features were extremely similar to Ning Shu's, and because of his kick, the owner of this face was heavily injured. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. But even so, she was still trying her best to plan for him. As for Lady Ning, although she is in a difficult situation for now, her life is not in danger and her injuries will slowly get better. With your secret protection, when you ascend the throne, you will naturally be able to protect her entire family. As for Mr. Xiaoho, others may not know, but Your Highness should know him like the back of your hand. He won't live for long. When he dies, Lady Ning will have no one else to rely on. Thinking about how you saved her, who else can she marry other than you? You can't spoil the plan because of a moment of anger. The hidden part of Xiao Yunyi's heart twitched and he frowned. Are you serious? Failwon swayed weakly. If Failwon says anything wrong, let me be struck by lightning and die a horrible death, and be despised by Your Highness for all eternity. This was one of the highest places in the entire palace. Xiao Yunyi closed his eyes and gripped the sword in his hand tightly. He felt the wind from above and felt the sky enveloping him from all directions without any obstacles. The scarlet cloak behind him flapped loudly, as if he was hiding the ambition in his heart. After a long time, he finally made a decision and said in a low voice, I'll believe you one more time. Below the high platform, a dignified and beautiful woman in a sandalwood dress looked up carelessly, then covered her mouth with a handkerchief and coughed softly. Beside her, a granny whose face was burned by fire supported her and said hoarsely, Jowie, you've been praying for His Majesty day and night and haven't been able to sleep. Your body is not very good and it's already late. I'll help you back to rest. Yin Jiaoyi said slowly, Shu Shui, it's an eventful time now. Many things are pending and we don't know if His Majesty will wake up again. How do you expect me to rest peacefully? Shu Shui said in a low voice, where there should be people, there are people. What should be done is going according to the track. What is there to worry about? When His Highness the Sixth Prince ascends to the throne and removes the stumbling block that is Empress Dowager Cao, there will be no one else but you. Your long-cherished wish of many years is about to be fulfilled. You should be happy. With Shu Shui's support, Yin Jiaoyi slowly walked along the long palace path. She was gentle and elegant like a mother of the world. Yes, it has been too long, too long. For this day, I have sacrificed too much. I even gave my only son to her. I've endured for so many years, and I've finally waited for this day. I'm not ashamed of the previous Empress' support. Shu Shui, are you looking forward to it? Shu Shui lowered her head. Her voice was like her person, like a hand that could easily cut people with a broken bowl. I am looking forward to it like Nyang Nyang. Yin Jiaoyi smiled. This person, who had pretended to be cautious for half her life in the palace, finally showed her first indulgent smile in many years on this empty palace road. She didn't make a single sound, but she was like a giant beast that bared its fangs and wanted to swallow the entire royal palace and the power of the world into its stomach. Wife, this is my family's Shizzy Yees idea, not mine. Don't ignore me. If it was me, I would definitely treat your young miss and you like Buddha in our Wang Fu and not let her take a step out. But I can't make the decision. Good wife, I'll apologize to you. As soon as the carriage stopped in front of the palace gate, Shi Yang hurriedly followed Zigui's footsteps, bowing and apologizing all the way. In return, Zigui rolled his eyes at him and scolded him, "Get lost." His ferocious attitude seemed to say that if Shi Yang said one more word, he would take a knife and cut him into pieces. That posture, no matter how thick-skinned and bold Shi Yang was, he shrunk back in fright. He watched as she went forward with heartache to help Ning Shu, who was squatting at the palace gates, into the carriage. She didn't want the people of the Wang Fu to drive the carriage. With a whip, she sent them all away and drove the carriage away herself. Shi Yang's eyes were filled with tears. He ate 3 li of dust and still didn't get Zigui to turn back. He held his head in grief and squatted on the ground, wanting to cry but having no tears. Chapter 538. It's Eldest Miss. That's great. Eldest Miss is back. Eldest Miss is back. Ning Shu had just gotten off the carriage. The originally gloomy house of Duke seemed to have finally seen a glimmer of hope. The whole house was in an uproar. When Forsythia saw Ning Shu, she couldn't help but cry emotionally. Even Madame Yang and the others, who were originally not on good terms with the second branch, wiped their tears and hurriedly greeted her. "Oh, Shu girl. Auntie is finally waiting for you. If you didn't come back, I'm afraid that the hundreds of people in our house of Duke would really be finished." Ning Deyuan didn't even have time to change his boots. When he heard the servant's report, he hurriedly rushed over. After carefully sizing up Ning Shu and confirming that she was fine, his wrinkled eyes twitched. The man who had always been indomitable had his eyes silently red. He clenched his fists. "Good child, it's great that you're fine. As long as you're fine, father and your mother don't need to be afraid of anything." Looking at the handsome man who had a similar silhouette to her, Ning Shu knew without a teacher that this should be her father. Because in this world, only biological parents would always put the safety of their children at the top of their hearts, above their own lives. Behind him, a small person struggled to keep up with his father's footsteps with a pair of short legs. It was little Ji-er. The originally soft and squishy fat ball of glutinous rice had lost a lot of weight in a short period of time. Because of his daily longing, his eyes were swollen from crying. Seeing Ning Shu, the little guy was stunned for a moment. Then, like a slingshot, he pounced on Ning Shu. His small mouth pouted and he wailed, "Sister, you're alive. That's great, that's great. Jia has a sister again. But, mother has been taken away. Elder sister, mother has been taken away." Looking at the eager faces in front of her, a vague sense of familiarity arose spontaneously like an instinct, making her have no choice but to get close to them. There were some people and some things that didn't need to be said. Blood ties were the most omnipotent summons. She urged her to stretch out her hands and embrace the soft ball in front of her. She softly coaxed, "Ji-er, don't be afraid. Sister is here. Sister will definitely save mother." After a short moment of excitement, Ning Deyuan evacuated the crowd and asked the nanny to take Ji-er away. He pulled Ning Shu to the side worriedly and said, "Good girl, you shouldn't have come back. That person wants to destroy our family. The longer you stay here, the more dangerous it will be. Go quickly. Father will assign all the personal guards around me to you. Take your brother and leave this place immediately. Father is begging you." Noticing that Ning Shu was different from before and her eyes were slightly dazed, Ning Deyuan was stunned and subconsciously asked Zigui, "Zigui, what's wrong with your young miss?" Zigui silently choked with sobs. She slowly opened her mouth, revealing a piece that was missing. Then, she anxiously picked up a branch from the ground and wrote about Ning Shu's serious injury and amnesia. "So that box and that piece of tongue were yours. In the end, I was too smart for my own good. I almost caused you to step into a desperate situation. It's my fault. I underestimated that person's terror. Ning Deyuan's eyes reddened even more. He beat his hands and stamped his feet, but the matter had already reached this point. It was urgent and he knew that he didn't have time to regret. He hurriedly made a decision. It's because father has already harmed you once that I can't watch you stay here. Leave this place. The situation is already out of control. We're already half buried in the earth. As long as I'm with your mother, it's enough for me whether I live or die. I only hope that you can live on. Ning Shu lightly but firmly shook her head. She rolled up her sleeves and showed Ning Deyuan the ugly and terrifying scars that had already healed and stopped bleeding. They bulged up and were ugly and terrifying. She completely destroyed his hope. Seeing these scars, you should understand. Father, I won't leave. I want to know who the person you're talking about is. Chapter 539. Ning Deyuan was shocked to see that his precious daughter, whom he could not even bear to say a harsh word to, had ended up in such a wounded state. He covered his face with heartache. This man used to be a handsome man, but after he became a husband and a father, he carried a heavy burden on his shoulders. He racked his brains and didn't dare to take a single wrong step, but in the end, he couldn't protect the treasure in his heart. That person is the most terrible person in the world. For so many years, he has been hovering around our family like a ghost. He tried everything, but not only did he fail to send Ning Shu away, but he also got her covered in wounds. Ning Deyuan knew that the person was ready to kill her, so he narrated with mixed feelings and tiredness. I first met your mother in the 6th year of Heaven's selection. At that time, I bumped into your mother on the street and fell in love with her at first sight. I did everything I could to get her to marry me. At first, I thought that your mother despised me because when I was young in the army, I was rude and didn't know how to be considerate to others. But I didn't expect that when I brought a matchmaker with me to propose marriage, she would actually agree. At that time, I was really overjoyed and couldn't contain my joy. I decided on the spot that I would do my best to give your mother the best and most lively wedding. Only then would she be worthy of the best Hishin in the world. Ning Deyuan slowly narrated, as if he was immersed in his memories. The smile on his face was joyful and painful. Because our house of Marquis was rich and Hishin was also a commandery princess personally conferred by the late emperor, I did not break my promise. That day, I rode a tall horse and brought your mother's wedding sedan chair. 10 miles of red wedding, flowers everywhere. The common people who came to watch the wedding were so packed that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Everyone exclaimed in admiration. This was definitely the most enviable wedding in the past 10 years. I think so too. Your grandfather, your grandmother, and even your mother smiled like spring flowers when they were performing the wedding ceremony. I thought that waiting for us would be the sweetest and most beautiful life. I didn't expect that on the first morning after we woke up as newlyweds, there would suddenly be a dark red wedding letter next to the 2 burnt-out wedding candles in our new room. There was only one word written on it, and there was a pungent smell of blood. I've killed people on the battlefield, so I know that it's human blood. Ning Shu's heart tightened and her brows wrinkled. Just when she entered the residence, she met hundreds of servants and guards. How could an ordinary person sneak in? Moreover, it was a newlywed's wedding room. For the sake of auspiciousness, there would be many guards around. In addition, her father had also fought on the battlefield. For a person to be able to quietly sneak in and do such a thing right under his nose, it was frightening. Ning Deyuan continued, your mother has always been timid, and we were newlyweds. I didn't want to frighten her, so I secretly hid the congratulatory letter and secretly investigated it. However, I searched the entire manor from top to bottom and couldn't find the slightest clue. In those few months, there was also no second strange incident. Although I had doubts in my heart, I also felt lucky. Perhaps that person had a grudge against me in the past, and after threatening me on the night of our wedding, he might have given up at that point. I observed for another half a year. As usual, nothing happened, so I completely threw that matter to the back of my mind. After a year or two, Your mother became pregnant with you. I was so happy that I almost wanted to flip the roof over. I immediately sent people to give porridge for 10 days to pray for you and your mother, and to protect you and your mother. I knew that your mother was afraid of pain and that it would be difficult for her to give birth. Therefore, during that time, I stayed by your mother's side and did not leave her side. I just watched your mother's belly grow bigger day by day, looking forward to the day you came into the world of the living. The heavens heard my pleas. You and your mother safely passed through the crisis. The entire residence was filled with jubilation. However, on such a joyous day, I did not expect that person to appear again. After your mother gave birth, she fell asleep for a while. When she woke up, she suddenly found that she was holding a piece of paper in her hand. This time, there were 4 words: "You rejoice, I grieve." Chapter 540. Ning Deyuan wiped his face and found the flowery letter that had been sealed away for nearly 18 years. The flowery letter had already turned yellow due to the erosion of time, but every word on it was filled with anger. They seemed to have been written with fresh blood. The blood was still hot, dripping down and seeping into the back of the paper bit by bit. It constantly clung to the thin paper, questioning, roaring, and cursing the outside of the paper. And there is a thick stack of words hidden under the paper. Ning Deyuan squeezed the scary and hateful things hard. It was from that day onwards that the invisible person haunted our house like a ghost, haunting us. Every time our family has a happy event, he will appear quietly and extinguish all the joy. No matter how many methods we have thought of and how many servants and guards we have placed around the mansion, we can't catch even a shadow of him. Over time, we don't even dare to announce the happy event, because every happy event ends in fear and intimidation. Your mother's body was originally weak, and after experiencing so many shocks, she even hurt her foundation. When she gave birth to your younger brother, she almost. But that person still refused to let us go, as if it was enough to force us to death. Your mother has asked me for many times to divorce her. In this way, that man may let go of the Ning family and only take revenge on your mother. But I have been with her for many years. How can I watch her in danger? I am worse than a beast. Seeing the back of Ning Deyuan's hand trembling violently, Ning Shu feels so sad that she can't breathe. Her nose is sour and she holds her father's arm. Ning Deyuan raises his head and looks at his daughter, who is as beautiful and determined as an orchid. He raises his hand and tucks a strand of hair on her forehead to her temples. We have been hiding this secret all these years. The only time it was revealed in front of you was when you were 10 years old. That crazy Taoist broke into the gate of the mansion and publicly sentenced you to the death of 9 generations of your family. We know that it is useless. Even if we die, it is useless. That man wants our whole family to die, including you. What was even more frightening was that we didn't even know what he wanted to do. We were like flies that were being toyed with by him. Seeing that your 17th birthday was approaching, we were worried sick, and your marriage had not been settled. Therefore, after a long period of deep thought, I came up with this idea, to create a false impression that you had been killed, and secretly send you away. At the same time, we also know that you have a clever personality, but you are the most stubborn in your bones. Once you set your mind on something, you will never turn back. You are exactly the same as me when I was young. If we tell you the truth, you definitely won't agree to leave the capital. So after I discussed with your mother, I made this decision. After you drank the special medicine, I had Pangui use a soul-controlling technique on you to send you safely out of the capital. Then I sent people to escort your grandmother and Jia out of the city in the second wave. Finally, I will meet you at the border of southern Yang Kingdom and live a peaceful life together with you while concealing your identity. However, who knew that when the plan was only half implemented, that man found out and almost killed you? Ning Deyuan raised his hand in self-reproach and slapped himself hard on the face, leaving 5 long fingerprints. Sure, it's daddy's useless. Not only was I unable to protect you, even your mother was imprisoned. It's daddy's incompetence. Chapter 541. Father. Seeing the finger marks on his face, Ning Shu pressed down on his hand. She couldn't stop her tears from rolling down. I wronged you. These years, how did you live? It wasn't a day or two, but nearly 17 years, nearly 6,000 days and nights. For her and for this family, they were like walking on thin ice, enduring unimaginable torture. Normal people would go crazy after a day like that, but what about them? No matter how exhausted they were at night, when they opened the door in the morning and faced her and they still had to do their best to smile and pretend to be at peace. She couldn't imagine it, because as soon as she thought about it, her heart hurt so much that she couldn't straighten her back. However, she knew that now wasn't the time to cry. Empress Cow's warning was still in her ears. There wasn't much time left for her and the Ning family. She held her breath. When she opened her eyes again, her thoughts were clear. Father, I still have a question. Why is that person so fixated on Mother? Ning Deyuan stooped down and sat on a high stool under the windowsill. The clouds covered the moon, and not a single ray of light could be seen. Only a corridor lamp outside the window swayed, casting a dim light on his dry lips. There is a secret that you may not know. Or rather, there aren't many people in the world who know that secret and are still alive. This has to be traced back to more than 20 years ago, when the present emperor hadn't ascended the throne and was still a nameless prince. There was a woman who the world called Empress Ju. At the time, although I wasn't very old, I was already enlightened. I was very familiar with this Empress Ju. She was really a strange woman. The previous emperor had 300 concubines in his harem. Young, beautiful, and talented, they were like carps in the river. But none of them had received the previous emperor's grand favor. To put it bluntly, the former emperor really wasn't a wise ruler. His throne hadn't been won by him through painstaking efforts. Instead, it had come from his mother, who was extremely scheming, and his uncle's family, who was extremely powerful. He was lazy and didn't like to govern the country. He left all the important matters of the country to the prime minister and assistant prime minister. He liked poetry and books the most and didn't care about the people's livelihood. Instead, he was interested in carpentry. In the 15 years after he ascended the throne, the people of Great Yu did not make any progress. The lives of the people became increasingly difficult, and there were complaints from the people everywhere. Countless imperial censors, remonstrants, and old ministers broke their heads in the throne room, but it was to no avail. Until Empress Ju came. From the first day she entered the palace, the previous emperor had been infatuated with her. In order to make her smile, the late emperor offered her countless treasures, but she didn't even look at them. He spent a lot of money to build the fairy stargazing tower, but she turned and left without even looking at it. The late emperor tried his best to find out that she liked pearls from the Eastern Sea, so he ordered hundreds of palace servants to spend half a year collecting Qianhu pearls from the Eastern Sea and sent them to her for her choice. She frowned and poured all the Qianhu pearls into the supreme liquid pool, scolding the late emperor for wasting money and manpower. In the end, the late emperor was at his wits' end. For her sake, he gradually began to attend court and ask about politics. Little by little, he also learned how to read memorials. His previous lazy, arrogant, and extravagant style took on a new lease of life, and he even began to look like a wise ruler. Such a big change made all the civil and military officials, as well as the millions of people, overjoyed and praised him. Empress Ju was the biggest contributor behind the scenes. However, there were also many people who were secretly worried. Empress Ju was beautiful, but there would always be a time when her beauty would fade. As the saying goes, love grows when beauty declines. When she was no longer as beautiful as a flower, the previous emperor would throw himself into someone else's arms. Would this great momentum be gone forever? But it turned out that they were thinking too much. As time passed, the previous emperor didn't dislike her. Instead, he favored her even more, to the point where he even wanted her to sit on the dragon throne with him. Perhaps it was on that day that the people's praise for Empress Ju turned into disgust overnight. Chapter 542. No one knows why Empress Ju became like that. Ning Deyuan's face was filled with emotion. A magnificent, legendary, and terrifying picture scroll slowly unfolded with his voice. Perhaps the late emperor gave her too much power. Not only did he allow her to choose the world's treasures, but he also allowed her to interfere in court politics. He even allowed her to pass memorials. When she was 40 years old, the late emperor did not hesitate to spend half of the national treasury to build Phoenix Terrace for her and ordered all the people of the city to come and pay their respects. Because the late emperor was getting older, the position of crown prince was still undecided. The court officials repeatedly mentioned it, but the late emperor blocked it on the grounds that he was waiting for the empress to give birth. Even after the late emperor passed the age of heaven, the empress was still unable to successfully give birth to a baby boy. The previous emperor could not withstand the pressure and finally decided to choose one of the princes. This prince was the one that the Empress of Ju had strongly recommended. He was her elder sister who had passed away, the only bloodline left behind by the Empress of Ju. He was also her nephew. This action was very similar to the Tang dynasty's Empress Wu several hundred years ago, preparing to steal the Li family's empire. The court officials were filled with righteous indignation. Opposing memorials floated to His Majesty's desk like snowflakes, but none of them entered the late emperor's eyes. Empress Ju's power was already as great as a giant beast. It could no longer be blocked, and she disdained to hide it. The crown prince was like a sword in her hand. As long as he was in her hand, she could sit firmly on the empire. Over time, even His Majesty began to realize her ambition and gradually distanced himself from her. However, it was already too late. Xiao Ju had discovered his intentions and made the first move by feeding him poison, causing him to fall ill. That poison was extremely mysterious. It was colorless and odorless. Even the most brilliant imperial physicians were unable to diagnose it. The only thing that could be seen was a blood-red 5-petaled plum blossom quietly blooming on his neck. At that time, everyone was lamenting that the Great Yu's empire was about to change hands and that the people were about to suffer. Who would have thought that Empress Ju would suddenly become insane overnight? She killed the late crown prince with one slash of her sword. Then, she used the blood-stained sword to kill the hundreds of people in the Phoenix Algae Palace. She then lit a fire and burned the corpses into black charcoal. She was the only one alive and was locked up in Phoenix Terrace by Jin Sheng's order. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court couldn't make up their minds on how to deal with this insane demon empress. After laughing crazily for a few days and nights, she lit another fire and buried herself together with the dazzling Phoenix Terrace. Since then, her time had finally passed. What has all this to do with your mother, you may ask? Actually, many of the secrets in this story were told to me by your mother before we got married. On the day of Empress Ju's 40th birthday, your mother went with her father and brother to Phoenix Terrace to congratulate her. Empress Ju once saw that your mother was born with exquisite features and that her 8 characters were extremely blessed, so she often summoned your mother into the palace to accompany her. Xian Di also often saw your mother in Phoenix Algae Palace, so he opened his golden mouth and said that this was the origin of your mother's Junju position. From the age of 7 to 10, your mother accompanied her in the palace for about 3 years until the day before the fire in Phoenix Algae Palace, when she suddenly fell ill and was sent out of the palace. By the time she recovered and woke up, it was already half a month later. She couldn't remember what happened during that time. However, your mother's temperament was gentle and she stood aloof from worldly affairs. Other than this matter, I can't think of any other possibility. It was such a long story. By the time Ning Deyuan finished, his throat was already hoarse and he was filled with exhaustion. And the many doubts in Ning Shu's heart had finally reached the tip of the iceberg. However, Ning Shu couldn't imagine what kind of unimaginable weight was hidden under that tip of the iceberg. In any case, Ning Shu had personally shattered Ning Deyuan's idea of sending them out of the capital. He couldn't think of any other way and could only return to his room to rest under Ning Shu's persuasion. In the hidden room, only Ning Shu and Zi Gui were left. The two of them looked at each other silently. Afraid that Ning Shu couldn't see clearly, Zi Gui specially took out a fairy rabbit lantern and placed it in front of Ning Shu. Under the lantern light, Ning Shu's tranquil face stared unblinkingly at the thick stack of old papers in the box. After a moment of deep thought, she asked Zi Gui for a cup of tea. She dipped her finger into the light green tea leaves floating on the surface and then quietly sorted out her thoughts on the table. 25 years ago, Empress Ju, the demon empress who brought disaster to the country, the late emperor was poisoned, and he suddenly went crazy when he was in power. Mother contracted an illness, and her memories were incomplete. 25 years later, the curses continued, a blood letter fell from the sky, the demon empress who brought disaster to the country, the present sage was in a coma, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Finally, she raised her finger and drew 2 strokes on the table. She wrote a big X on the table. Then, she slowly and solemnly wrote the last 3 words behind the X, Y. Chapter 543. At this time, it was the deepest part of the night. Not a sound could be heard. It was so quiet that even the sound of a needle falling to the ground would be ear-piercing. In front of Funning Palace Hall, the palace where His Majesty was recuperating was heavily guarded. It was so tight that not even a drop of water could trickle through. They were strictly protecting the safety of His Majesty. A white-haired woman came out of nowhere and rushed over, her mouth full of crazy words. "Your Majesty, I'm here. Kai Su is here to see you, Your Majesty. Don't worry. With me here, no one can harm you. No one can. Your Majesty, wait for me. I'm coming to save His Majesty. Guards, quickly stop her. Her Majesty the Empress has ordered that no one is allowed to enter without permission to see His Majesty. Quickly let me go. Do you lowly servants know who I am? I'm a dignified concubine. Who dares to stop me? Get out of my way. Ah! Let me go. Woo-woo. Let me go. Let me go see His Majesty. I beg you. His Majesty will be heartbroken if he doesn't see me. Your Majesty." Hearing the ear-piercing noise outside, Empress Cow, who was gently and considerately feeding His Majesty medicine, knocked the spoon in her hand against the bowl. She frowned and put the bowl to the side. She walked out with a sullen face and a displeased expression. When she saw Madame Jiang, who was making a scene outside the palace hall, she narrowed her eyes and said sternly, "Who let this crazy woman out? Commander Sun, immediately take this slut back to the cold palace. The eunuchs in charge of watching over her have committed a crime of negligence. They'll all be beaten to death." Jiang Kai-su was dragged to the ground by the guards in a sorry state. She was like an old dog that was about to die. However, this dog was still struggling to take one last bite before dying. "Cao Wenyu, do you think that no one will know about your evil deeds if you lock me up? Dream on. Even if you're omnipotent, you can't hide it for 10 days. You can't hide it for a lifetime. Back then, you used a scheme to poison my newborn son and even framed me. Now, you want to poison the current emperor to death. You poisonous woman, you heinous beast. In the future, your evil deeds will be recorded in the history books, and your name will be cursed by the people for generations to come." Empress Cow's face, which had always been graceful and magnanimous, turned extremely ugly. She almost angrily pointed at them and said, "Are you all deaf? This consort orders all of you to immediately take this crazy woman back to the cold palace and gag her mouth. If you hear her utter another word of nonsense, cut off her tongue." The imperial bodyguard's hair stood on end. "This humble subject obeys the decree. You want to cut my tongue? Everyone in the palace, listen to me. Cao Wenyu actually has a guilty conscience. If you have the ability to do it, then do it. Don't be afraid of others talking about it." Ha 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 ha, guilty conscience, woo woo. Jiang Chisu was still desperately struggling to vent. Finally, her mouth was gagged by a guard with a piece of ragged cloth. She opened her eyes wide and intermittently uttered her final curse in her throat. "Cow. Wenyu. I'll open my eyes wide and wait for you to have an empty dream." Ha 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 ha, what an empty dream. Empress Cow's face was livid. She almost lost her composure and shouted, "Take her away. Gag her mouth and take her away immediately. When Jiang Chisu was finally knocked unconscious and dragged away by the imperial bodyguards, Empress Cao clenched her trembling hands under her bright yellow sleeves. She walked back to Funning Palace with a tense expression. Call the sixth prince over for this consort. Immediately. Yes. This servant will go and invite His Highness the sixth prince. Cai Bing did not dare to delay and ran out. After a cup of tea, Xiao Yuni came over with his hand on his sword. His face was still tired from being awakened in the middle of the night. After kowtowing, he removed his cloak and sword. He walked in front of Empress Cao and bent his knees in front of her. He looked up at her and said gently, Imperial Mother, I heard that the abandoned consort of the Cold Palace ran out and disturbed you. Can Ersi Hen deal with her for you? Empress Cao opened her eyes and pinched his arm hard. What's the use of dealing with her? Wasn't she locked up in the Cold Palace? How did she know what happened outside the Cold Palace? Who told her all of this? Also, who was the one who let her out? Who was it? Could it be that there's a hidden force in the palace that even I don't know about that is manipulating all of this? Chapter 544. Because she was too agitated, Empress Cao's well-maintained long and sharp nails dug deeply into Xiao Yuni's arm. She quickly sobered up and let go of his hand, saying tiredly, It's mother. I lost my composure. Xiao Yuni smiled unconcernedly. No, it's that crazy woman who barged in and said crazy things that frightened mother. Mother, don't worry. From tonight onwards, Ersi Hen will personally guard outside the palace and won't let anyone disturb you. As for what mother is worried about, Ersi Hen will find a way to find out as soon as possible. As long as I'm here, you won't be in any danger. His respectful attitude greatly pleased the Empress. She raised her hand to hold the obedient face in front of her. You're a good person. With you here, mother can rest assured. Good child, that bitch in the Cold Palace has lived long enough and is tired of living. Your father is seriously ill and she suddenly made a scene today and worsened His Majesty's condition. She has committed such a grave sin. You should end her for me. Yes, mother. Xiao Yuni took the order and turned to leave. Behind him, Empress Cao suddenly said calmly and distantly, will you betray me? Xiao Yuni's footsteps paused. He turned around and pressed a hand to his chest, saying with a smile, No, Ersi Hen will always be loyal to mother. The corners of Empress Cao's mouth rose, her eyes filled with a gentle and loving smile. She looked at him from afar and said, Good child, remember the words you said today. You must also remember that without Imperial Mother, no one can help you sit on the throne. Imperial Mother's future will depend on you. Imperial Mother and you are one. Ersi Hen will always remember this. Xiao Yuni took off his sword and cloak and changed into a cold golden armor. He stepped out of the majestic palace and then pushed open the rotten door of the Cold Palace. Half an hour later, there was a shrill scream from the palace. Xiao Yuni walked out with a dark expression, holding a bloody sword. His personal guard wanted to go forward to take the sword, but was frozen by his gaze and did not dare to go close. The stars above shone brightly, but under the watery starlight, half of Xiao Yuni's face was splattered with hot blood. In such a hot and humid summer night, the heat dissipated especially slowly. The guard had followed him to many battles, but it was the first time he saw his gaze so terrifying. It was 1,000 times colder and more complicated than before, like an abyss that was hidden in the dark. This night, many people were destined to not be able to sleep. When Ning Shu woke up, her head was very heavy. She rubbed her head and asked for Scythia to bring her a basin of cold water. She patted her face to make herself feel better. After helping Ning Shu freshen up and change her clothes, Forsythia did not stop to prepare breakfast. She looked at Ning Shu with tears in her eyes. Miss, you've suffered outside these days. Chapter 545. Hui Mo held the reins and drove the carriage, taking Ning Shu slowly away from the gate of Marquis's mansion. Lady Ning, this case is complicated. Where should we start? Imperial Mausoleum, Princess Royal's Mansion, or the Shankishan Mountain where the first demon appeared, or the place where the children went missing. Although he had cooperated with Ning Shu to deal with several major cases before, no matter from the degree of trouble or the scope of the cases involved, those cases were far less than the current one. It gave him a headache as long as he thought about it. Ning Shu was flipping through the pile of case files that Tian Wen had collected early in the morning. Her voice was like a sea-stabilizing needle, suddenly stabilizing the complicated and chaotic situation in front of her. The more complicated the case is, the more you need to know how to peel the silk from the cocoon. If you have a plan in mind, you won't panic and be confused by the chaos in front of you. This string of cases appeared to be many and complicated, like many camouflage methods tangled together, with the addition of ghosts, gods, and heresy, making people unable to find the direction. But after careful analysis, there were only two cases: the sudden death of Princess Helui on the street, and the disappearance of 3 children in the east, south, and north of the city. Princess Helui had been dead for many days. The dead could not be resurrected. The clues that should be left would not run away, and the clues that should not be left would not be left, so they could be put aside for the time being. The children's disappearance was the most important case at present. At present, there were cases in the east, south, and north of the city. Only the one in the west of the city was left. According to the timeline of the murderer's crime, the first few cases were all 3 days apart. Only the 4th case had not happened today, which was the 5th day. There were 2 possibilities. First, in fact, it had already happened, but the family was careless and did not find it, so they did not have time to report. Second, the murderer had other plans. Maybe there was an accident, or deliberately waiting for her to take the bait. Anyway, those children who were not sure whether they were alive or dead still had a glimmer of hope. If it was delayed, the consequences could only be regretted. After making a decision, Ning Shu opened her mouth and said, "Go to the east of the city, where the first child disappeared." After she finished speaking, she noticed that the carriage seemed to slow down. Hui Mo, who was chattering outside the carriage, was silent for a while. She opened the curtain in surprise and gently tilted her head to look at him. Your tone just now made me think. Hui Mo wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. However, when he met her pure and clear eyes, he changed his mind. It's nothing. I went the wrong way. Go to the east of the city. The path just now is faster. Go. He must be overthinking things. How could Lady Ning have recovered her memory? She was so smart and had so many twists and turns in her heart. How could she look at others with such a naive gaze? Although she had lost her memory, she was still herself, so it was normal for her to speak like that. Moreover, if she had regained her memories, how could she not ask his young master immediately? He was thinking too much. Ha 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 ha. His driving skills were completely different from Hui Mo's. Soon, he smoothly stopped the carriage in front of the door of the first family where the child disappeared. It was a very ordinary family. They lived in a place called Denglong Alley. Most of the people living in this alley were craftsmen who made lanterns and oiled paper. From the mottled walls of each family, one could see the poverty of this area. Only the colorful lanterns hanging in front of each family's door barely embellished some vitality. But this little vitality was also destroyed by a woman with disheveled hair and dirty face who was sitting at the entrance of the alley and crying. This woman had cried for many days. Her eyes were swollen and her body was dirty. She kept slapping her own mouth. Dongbao, my Dongbao, why haven't you come back? You are my flesh and blood. How can I live without you? It's my fault that I didn't take care of you. I knew it was a mess outside, but how could I be so careless and not take care of you? It's my fault. I am guilty. Come back and let me suffer for you. Let me die for you. Chapter 546. Dongbao's mother, don't be like this. Even if you beat yourself to death, you won't be able to get Dongbao back. You haven't eaten for a few days. Let me help you back and at least have a bite. Otherwise, What if the officials find Dong Bao and you starve to death first? A kind-hearted auntie tried to persuade her. However, Mother Dong Bao turned a deaf ear to her words. She was so dumb that she couldn't hear a thing. She only regretted and blamed herself over and over again. The pain of losing her child easily broke this mother's heart overnight. Poor thing. Mother Dong Bao, don't tell me that something happened to her. Look at how she slapped herself. I can't bear to see it. But it's reasonable. Who would be so worried about losing their child for so many days? If this happened to my family, Bodhisattva, please don't let this happen. Yes, yes, yes. Everyone has been keeping an eye on their baby recently. Please don't make any more mistakes. Sigh, the child is the life of the parents. If the child is gone, what's the use of the parents' life? Ning Shu and Hui Mo stood behind the crowd and watched this scene. They didn't feel good about it. Mother Dong Bao seemed to have broken down mentally. If she was asked about the details, she would be even more agitated. Hui Mo pulled a seemingly warm-hearted woman aside and asked, "Auntie, do you live here?" The auntie turned around and saw a tall, thin, and amiable young man. She had a good impression of him. "Yes. Are you neighbors with Mother Dong Bao?" "Of course. We've been neighbors for more than 10 years. Her family is honest and hardworking. They've never taken advantage of others. They're all good people. Who knew that something like this would happen?" Sigh. God doesn't love good people. Then can you tell us the details of how Dong Bao went missing? Hearing this, the woman became alert. She looked at Hui Mo and then at Ning Shu, who was dressed as a man. "Who are you?" "We are." When Hui Mo was about to answer truthfully, Ning Shu spoke first. "We are the bailiffs of the Supreme Court." Because of the recent cases, the common people did not have a good impression of Cao Hu, Princess He Xin, and the others, not to mention the demoness Ning Shu, who was infamous for being unlucky to come back from the dead. If he were to reveal his true identity at this time, not only would he not be able to get any clues, he might even be smashed by the commoners. Hui Mo suddenly had an idea and responded, "Yes. We have been ordered by the Supreme Court to investigate this case, and this person is the most powerful judge in the Supreme Court. He has solved many major and important cases. For example, a few years ago, a fox demon caused mischief in Lai City, and 9 men's young energy was sucked dry. Another case was the sudden appearance of a murderer in Gunju, who committed 26 crimes in 8 years and killed countless young girls. Also, last year, dozens of houses in the western part of the city collapsed for no reason. In short, this Mr. Yangui was a very good detective. Previously, we were out of town. When we heard that several children were missing, we rushed back to solve the case. Don't worry, with Mr. Yangui here, it is easy to subdue demons and eliminate demons. Everything is difficult to solve." Hui Mo mixed the truth with lies. Anyway, these people were in the capital all year round. Who knew what had happened in Laiju and Gunju? It sounded scary enough. In the end, he added the fact that something had really happened in the capital. He really fooled them. Ning Shu, who was listening to Hui Mo's eloquent words, wished she could cover her face. Fox demon, murderer, he even bragged about subduing demons and eliminating demons. If she could not solve this case in the future, she was afraid that she would be drowned by the common people's saliva. Chapter 547. When Dong Bao's mother, who had been immersed in her own world, heard the words detective, the veins on her temples twitched and she suddenly woke up. She was like a drowning person who suddenly saw a straw. Regardless of whether it could save her life or not, she had to hold on tightly to it. She doesn't have time to get up. Maybe she doesn't have the strength to get up. She almost crawls over and grabs Ning Shu's clothes. "Are you a detective?" "Yes, yes, I must be. You are here to help me. Please help me. Dong Bao has never left me for so many days since he was born. He must be missing me every day and calling me to save him every day. Detective, I beg you, please save my child. I am willing to be your slave for the rest of my life." Her forehead hits the ground. Ning-Shu can't bear to see her like this. She hurriedly helps her up. Lin Luoran thought that she couldn't help her alone and wanted to ask Huemore to help her. However, she didn't expect that the woman in front of her is so strong that she can move her easily. Lin Luoran then sees that she has fainted. Every day when she misses her child, Lin Luoran has already exhausted all her strength. Several neighbors hurriedly help to carry Dong Bao's mother into the house. The aunt who talked to Huemore just now warmly goes home to cook hot porridge for Dong Bao's mother. She also helps her tidy up her body. After that, she goes back home with sweat all over her body. Looking at Dong Bao's mother, Ning-Shu can't help but think of her own mother. She hid thousands of secrets in her heart. She suffered a lot but didn't tell them anything. She even proposed to divorce and wanted to use herself to block the disaster for her family. Ning-Shu's eyes are filled with tears. She turns her head and blinks her eyes quickly. Dong Bao's mother didn't eat rice today. After drinking the hot porridge, she quickly regains a little strength. She leans on the edge of the bed. Her hands, which are rough and deformed because of years of work, are unconsciously rubbing back and forth. It seems that she is missing the days when her hands used to hold another pair of white and tender hands. Her lips trembled, and before she could say anything, 2 streams of tears had already rolled down her cheeks. He only said for the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, and went out to find his best friend to play for the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. The room was full of lanterns of various styles and colors. Apart from the lanterns, there was only an old wooden bed, a pile of bamboo strips used to make lanterns, oiled paper, and 2 short wooden tables, one of which was missing a small corner, which looked very funny. Ning-Shu sat quietly on the wooden chair with a missing corner, listening to her mother's sad narration. I thought that the person he likes to hang out with the most is old Li's grandson at the end of the alley. They're neighbors, so what could happen? So I let him go. His father and I were in a hurry to make lanterns, waiting to sell this batch of lanterns to earn money for his private school next month, so we didn't pay attention to the time. It wasn't until all the lanterns were set up that I realized he hadn't returned yet. I thought that the child was so playful that he forgot to come home, so I got up and went to old Li's house to ask. But old Li's family said that they didn't see Dong Bao at all. His father and I panicked and hurried to look for him. We knocked on every door in the alley, and searched every street and alley in the surrounding area. As long as we saw someone, we would ask. We searched from the middle of the month until 5 o'clock, and even our voices were hoarse from shouting, but no one saw him. It wasn't until dawn that his father finally saw his little shoes under a crooked tree by the river. Tears were worthless in the face of sadness. Dong Bao's mother finished her story intermittently, and almost fainted from crying again. Ning-Shu quickly asked to divert her attention, "Where is the shoe now? How can you be sure that it's your son's shoe? Is there any mark on it?" Dong Bao's mother took out a small cloth bag from her arms. "It's here. This is the shoe I made for him last month. I made it myself. Dong Bao's nickname is Winter Melon, and I also embroidered his nickname on the shoe." Ning-Shu took the shoe and looked at it carefully. Then she asked Huemore to take a pen and paper and draw the shoe's shape carefully. She got up and went to the outer room to pour a bowl of water for Dong Bao's mother to calm her down. Then she continued to ask softly, "Where is the shoe by the river? How far is it from your house? Are there any other clues around it?" "It's on the east bank of the Lizhui River, about 4 or 5 miles away from my house. There's nothing around it, except for the strange symbol, which is exactly the same as the one found by the other families. Then on the day Dong Bao disappeared, what clothes was he wearing? What gadgets or food did he have on him? Do you remember what happened to him before he disappeared or what he said that made you pay attention?" "Our family is poor. Dong Bao was wearing an ordinary blue shirt and a pair of grey trousers that day. He grew taller this year, so we didn't save enough money to buy him a new one, so it looked short. I also rarely bought him toys and snacks. At most, his father was more skillful with his hands and would make some small dragonflies for him with bamboo strips and leaves. He especially liked things like slingshots and kept them in his pocket every day. He didn't say anything that day. He just came back from the school happily as usual and read to me in a low voice. Do you know what a great detective is? Although Dong Bao was naughty, he loved to study. He remembered every word that the teacher taught him. Every day after school, he would come back and read to me. Speaking of this, Dongbao's mother couldn't hold it anymore. She beat her chest hard and cried, "Dongbao, I'm such a bad person. I gave birth to you, but I didn't let you live a good life. I even lost you." In this kind of sadness, any words to comfort her seemed pale. The only thing they could do was to accompany her quietly until she finally calmed down a little. But until they left, Ning Shu could still hear Dongbao's mother murmuring over and over again, "Why didn't I buy him a new pair of trousers? I should have. Why didn't I buy him a new pair of trousers?" Chapter 548. They only questioned one family and they are already so sad. There are still 2 more families to go. Hui Mo pursed his lips. He has done so many cases in the capital, but this case is the most uncomfortable one. He would rather dissect 1,000 corpses than listen to these sad cries. But he knows that time is precious. It is useless to waste time on sadness. The most important thing now is to seize every opportunity to race against time. Only in this way can those children have a chance to survive. Hui Mo waved his whip and drove the carriage quickly. In the carriage, Ning Shu is lying on the small table to sort out the clues. She unconsciously bites her lower lip and concentrates without a trace of distracting thoughts. The paper in her hand is drawn with the talisman that repeatedly appeared at the scene of the missing children. In this half a day, they had braved the scorching sun from the east to the south, and from the south to the north. Their clothes had long been soaked and dried, and just as they were about to dry, they were soaked and soaked again. There was a layer of white salt on the edges of their clothes. When they finally finished questioning the 3 families, the sun was already setting in the west. Ning Shu walked out of the last house. Her left sleeve was covered with the sweat on her forehead, while her right sleeve was covered with the tears of the last missing child's only relative, the old grandmother who was close to 70 years old. "Let's go." Ning Shu tiredly waves her hand and signals Hui Mo to go to the next destination. She steps on the stool, but before she can stand firm, she suddenly falls down. "Be careful." Hui Mo slides and quickly stretches out his arm to support her. He doesn't want her to fall and bleed. If this Lady Ning is injured in front of his eyes, how can he go back to see his Shizzy? Ning Shu grabs the railing to stabilize herself. She leans her head against the side of the carriage and says in a hoarse voice, "It's just too hot. My eyes are dazzled by the sun. It's okay. Let's go to the temple where the 3rd child is missing. Hey, don't try to be brave. The temple is not far away. I'll go alone. Don't worry. Although I'm not as sharp as you, my eyes are very good. You should rest here for a while. Your injuries haven't completely healed yet, and you've been running around for half a day without taking a break. If you get sick, my family's heir will be heartbroken." Huemore was a straightforward person. He said a lot of things like pouring beans out of a bamboo tube. When the last sentence came out, it was too late to stuff it back. He quickly shut his mouth and quietly looked at Ning Shu's expression. Ning Shu lowered her eyes. Because of exhaustion, her face was so pale that it was almost transparent. Will his heart ache? He subconsciously wanted to answer, of course. But recently, Shizzy Yi's attitude really made him a little confused. Shizzy Yi was willing to give up his life for her before, but now he was suddenly so cold. Unable to give a definite answer, he could only keep quiet. Ning Shu's lowered eyelashes trembled slightly, but she didn't say anything as she stepped into the carriage. "Let's go. There are some details that I need to confirm, so I'll go with you." Okay. I have a bottle of medicine to reduce the heat. Take it and you'll feel better." When the curtain fell, Huemore showed a sad expression and gently slapped himself. "You're such a talkative person. You talk too much. Go." During the day, there were slightly more people in the temple. But because of this case, the government had already sent people to surround the place where the crime was committed to prevent the remaining clues from being destroyed. But even so, It didn't make much of a difference, because the murderer did it too cleanly. Other than the silver bracelet and the strange black talisman that the child always had with him since he was young, they didn't find anything else even after turning the ground upside down. Ning Shu looked at it for a long time and didn't say anything. Huemore also curiously squatted over and looked at the strange shape in front of him. Hiss, there's a circle in the middle of this talisman. Dozens of black lines spread out in all directions. What does it mean? Is it drawing the sun? But I've never seen a black talisman that is so ugly. The lines are crooked. It's uglier than a child's drawing. While Huemore was commenting, he suddenly heard Ning Shu say, "It's different." "What's different?" Ning Shu said sharply. "This talisman is different from the other two. Or, these three are subtly different." "Really?" She kept the few copies of the paintings in her bosom and took them out for comparison. "Look, they all look the same. They all have a circle and dozens of lines. They're so ugly that they're in a unique style. It's a little different." He took a closer look and carefully compared them bit by bit. He really did discover some slight differences. Chapter 549. Although these few look very similar, if you look closely, the first circle is smoother and fuller, the third stroke is slightly twisted and rough, the second one is just average. Looking at the black lines, the first one is blunt and seems to have stopped abruptly, the second one is obviously thinner than the second one, the third one is more obvious, the lines are a little bit crooked in the same direction. Could it be that they were drawn by three different people? Huemore still remembered that he had accompanied Ning Shu to investigate Shui Hongyi's case, so he let his imagination run wild. Could it be that there are three different murderers in this case? Or the first one committed the crime, and the other two just happened to want to do evil, so they imitated to hide their real identities? Before Ning Shu could speak, someone had already answered for her. There are indeed precedents of imitating crimes, but this case shouldn't be the case. The voice was gentle and harmless, making people feel good when they heard it. Ning Shu turned her head and saw that it was Tan Siwei, who had become calm without the doll. "I had doubts about the differences between these charms before, but after checking these days, I denied this speculation. First of all, the time of the crime is every 3 days, and the pattern is very strong. If it was done by different people, it would be difficult to achieve such a degree of tacit understanding. Second, the families of the 3 missing persons cases live in the east, south, and north of the city. The west corner of the city is missing, but if you circle them one by one on a map, you will find that the 3 families form a tripartite balance. Such a clever calculation, it is definitely done by the same group of people. As for how many people there is no way to know for the time being." After he finished his analysis, he saw Ning Shu's serious listening and approving eyes. Tan Siwei's face quietly blushed again. He was a little flustered. "I have been investigating this case before, so I know a little about it. I heard that you took over this case, and I thought that I might be able to help you a little, so I came in a hurry. I just don't know if you need me." This was the time when they were most short of manpower, and this person already had a detailed understanding of the case. Such a helper was welcome. Ning Shu didn't even think about it. "Of course, I'll have to trouble you." This unfamiliar tone stunned Tan Siwei. He immediately recalled the words that Xiahou Qing had said to him in the letter. He smiled and took a step back. He cupped his hands and said, "As long as you don't think I'm more of a hindrance than a help, it's fine. I'm Tan Siwei of the Supreme Court. Greetings, Miss Ning. It's an honor to be of service to Miss Ning." Beside him, Huemore's eyes widened. "Tan Siwei, what are you trying to do?" Seeing the two of them greeting each other harmoniously, he immediately felt a strong sense of crisis for his Shizzy. Although this Tan Siwei was not as good-looking as his Shizzy, he had a harmless appearance and a soft temper, which made him easy to bully. Although his family was ruined, he was still a junior minister of the Supreme Court at such a young age. No matter how you looked at it, he could be considered a young talent. The most infuriating thing was that he was good at currying favor. If this kind of person stuck to Lady Ning every day to handle cases, they would see each other frequently. In addition, Lady Ning was feeling sad because of the Shiz's coldness recently. Who knew what would happen? Right. He remembered that these two people were tied with a marriage contract. Oh my God, what should he do? Chapter 550. The first missing child, Qian Dongbao, was 8 years old. He disappeared in the middle of the night 11 days ago. He disappeared at the Lizhui River, 5 miles away from home. Before leaving home, he said that he was going to find his good friend. He carried his favorite slingshot with him. The second child, Wang Xiaosheng, was 8 years old. He disappeared in the evening 8 days ago. He disappeared in the Yushirei Alley, 3 streets away. Because he was naughty and liked to cause trouble, he accidentally broke a vase at home before leaving home. He had just been reprimanded by his parents. The third child, Zhao Mian was 7 years old. He disappeared 5 days ago. A few years ago, his father died in the battlefield. The rest of the family died of illness one after another. The only one in the family was an old grandmother in her 70s or 80s. She quarreled with her friends while playing and walked alone on a small path. Late at night, the grandmother waited for a long time and did not return. She hurriedly reported the disappearance to the local government. At this point, the details of the 3 missing children were basically collected. There was also an incantation map that no one could understand. In the Supreme Court's Tan Siwei's office, Tan Siwei, Ning Shu, and Hui Mo surrounded the case and carefully analyzed it. Most of the cases that revolved around children were committed for several reasons. At most, it was a case of kidnapping and selling. A person's life was worth an ingot of silver. It was a transaction without capital. Knockout drugs and ropes were used to smuggle them to the countryside or other cities. The better-looking ones were sold to brothels, and the plain-looking ones were sold to rich families as slaves. The villagers would be sold as child brides for money. Killing for revenge was not uncommon. There were neighbors, distant relatives, and even passers-by who quarreled with each other. They held grudges in their hearts and were unable to do anything to the adults. When they saw that the children were weak and easily bullied, they became bold and wanted to end their enemy's bloodline. There were also kidnapping and extortion cases, those who were born crazy, and those who accidentally failed. There were all kinds of reasons. Children, under the blue dome of heaven, were like flowers that had just plucked 2 tender leaves and formed a small bump. They were fresh, beautiful, and full of hope. But before they could grow up, they would suddenly meet some cruel hands and break them with a gentle pinch. But this case was completely different from those common cases. The 3 children lived in different directions and had never interacted with each other. Their families were poor and even had difficulties making ends meet. Like most of the poor children in the capital, they were ordinary and invisible in the public. But they were all chosen to be the sharp arrows and spears to attack the current empress. Ning Shu's heart could not help but feel a sense of absurdity. How innocent, how hateful. One could imagine the difficulty of this case. However, the more difficult it was, the more they had to think of ways to dig out hidden connections in seemingly unrelated information, and then follow the clues to find the final answer. Huemo's mind was simple, but he was careful. Soon, he found a few obvious doubts. Hey, what a coincidence. These 3 little fellows are all boys, and none of them are girls. They are all about 7 or 8 years old. Yes, did you find any other similarities? Ning Shu wanted to encourage him to think more and slowly learn how to solve cases. With Ning Shu's approval, Hui Mo becomes more confident and continues to observe. Let me see. The first time of disappearance is at night, the second time is not long after dinner, and the last time is in the evening. In short, it is the end of the day. This timing doesn't seem right. Ning Shu asked again, what's wrong? It's too dangerous, isn't it? Hui Mo frowned. This is a sensitive time for both adults and children. Because in our concept of the night, it often represents fear and danger. I remember that since I was a child, My mother always held my son's ear and warned him, if you are not obedient, be careful that evil spirits will come and take you away at night. So when I was a child, as long as it was dark, I was very well behaved. If one day I was naughty and accidentally caused trouble, I would bury myself in the quilt at night to prevent evil spirits from catching me. No matter how bold and naughty these children are, they are only a few years old. Wang Xiaosheng was scolded by his parents and ran away. However, it was so dark outside. At most, he would wander around in front of the door. How dare he run to the dead end of the 3 alleys? Not to mention the other 2 children. They ran for several miles and went to the corners of the river and the local temple. Even an ordinary man would need a lot of effort to run 4 or 5 miles at night. How can children do it? Chapter 551. Ning Shu's eyes were soft. So, you think that the place where the amulets and tokens appeared may not be the real place where the children went missing, but the murderer deliberately confused us? Hui Mo scratched his head. I don't know, it's just a random guess. Your guess is very reasonable. Regardless of whether it was Lizhui River, Yushure Alley, or the Earth Temple, they were all places with a relatively large flow of people. First was Lizhui River, where the summer heat was unbearable. The common people had worked hard all day, so at night it was the best time to go out and enjoy the cool air. The Lizhui River riverside was picturesque, so before the curfew, many common people would go there hand in hand. Next was Yushure Alley, where there was a large population. The houses of each household were close to each other, very close to each other. It was common to hear a family quarrel at the entrance of the alley. Finally, there was the Earth Temple. Although it was not as popular as the Great Xianghua Temple, it still had many devout believers. These places were crowded with people, so even the slightest movement would be easily discovered. It was definitely not a suitable place to commit a crime. Although Qian Dongbao and the others were still children, they were all strong boys. If they met someone who didn't succeed, they would definitely resist and make noise. The murderer chose these places to commit the crime. Either he was actively seeking death or he was extremely stupid. Obviously, the murderer we are looking for does not belong to any of the 2. Hui Mo, you are very sharp. It was rare for Ning Shu to praise him so straightforwardly that Hui Mo's face turned red. He touched his head and giggled. Ning Shu turned her head and said, Tan Shaoqing, do you have any other discoveries these days? When talking about this case, Tan Siwei's face was very serious. I think so too. These places are definitely not the first crime scene, but the murderer deliberately set up a trap. Since the first crime, my subordinates and I have lined up these houses one by one within a radius of 5 miles. We also asked passers-by one by one and found something very strange. After these children left home, no one has seen them. Hui Mo blinked and did not understand. What's wrong? Ning Shu lowered her eyes and thought for a moment, then she understood. Do you know what the poor streets lack the most? People. A half-grown child wandering alone in the street at night, no matter whether they know him or not, as long as they see him, he will leave a deep impression. Some warm-hearted people will take the initiative to persuade him, it's dangerous at night, don't wander outside, go home quickly. But very strangely, these children seemed to have turned into smoke and floated away. So many neighbors did not see any of them. This is the most suspicious point. Hui Mo reacted, hey, that's true, but what does this mean? The murderer is so resourceful that he went from house to house and caught the children as soon as they ran out of the house. Ning Shu gently shook her head. The premise of waiting for the rabbit must know that the rabbit will definitely appear. If something happens to the rabbit he's targeting tonight, and it doesn't show up as promised, then even if he keeps watch for an entire night, it'll all be for naught. The murderers, the murderers, the murderers, the murderers, the murderer is the murderers, the murderers, the murderer, the murderers, the murderers, the murderer. Besides, if he wandered in front of someone's house at night, wouldn't he be waiting for Yong Chengwei to target him? There were more and more questions. Hui Mo's mind was in a mess. The murderer not only has to ensure that the selected children will go out that night, but also that the children will not struggle and make any noise to be noticed. He also has to ensure that no one sees him. Hiss, it's so difficult. Is there a spell that can control people's minds and make them invisible? Lady Ning, don't keep us in suspense. Tell us quickly. The answer is very simple. He has made an appointment with the children in advance. When to go out that night, where to meet, and the children will take the initiative to avoid the crowd to find him at the appointed place. Ning Shu's voice was clear and crisp, like pearls falling into a plate. How is this possible? Not to mention Hui Mo, even Tan Siwei showed a look of surprise. They have seen moths flying to the fire, but they have never seen a cicada sending itself to the mouth of a mantis or meat in front of a lion. However, Ning Shu's eyes moved slowly and glanced at them. What if the murderer is a good friend in their hearts, a person they can absolutely trust? Chapter 552. Ning Shu's guess was like a bolt of lightning, piercing everyone's brain. It was also like a key that opened up an impossible possibility. This guess seemed ridiculous, but if it was not so, how could it explain the suspicious points one after another? Hui Mo suddenly remembered. Before Chen Dongbao left home, he told his mother that he was going to find his good friend. Tan Siwei also seemed to have thought of something. He quickly walked to the file shelf and found the latest file. He opened it and spread it in front of Ning Shu. Zhao Mianer's father died in the battlefield when he was 3 years old, and then his mother died of illness. Therefore, he was depressed and unsociable, so he was very isolated. The reason he quarreled with his friends that day was that he was ridiculed. Zhao Mianer said angrily, "Who said that I don't have friends? I'll find them for you." It seems that he was not angry at that time, but really went to find his friend. And that friend made an agreement with him that if he wanted to find him, he could not let a third person see him. Ning Shu smiled slightly. So, our next step is to find the common friend of these 3 children as soon as possible. Hui Mo's eyes lit up. Let's go. Wait. Ning Shu was about to turn around, but Tan Siwei interrupted her. After talking about the case, he quickly returned to being a gentle young man. His eyes, which had experienced the changes in his family and the coldness of human relationships, still retained his unique clarity and enthusiasm. "Miss Ning, the weather is really hot. I've prepared some plum soup. Drink some and you won't feel too uncomfortable when you go out to investigate the case." Facing such a pair of clear eyes, no one could be indifferent. Ning Shu was stunned for a moment and said subconsciously, "No, the investigation is more important, and I don't feel uncomfortable now." Before she finished, she was interrupted by Tan Siwei. He said seriously, "Your face is so pale and you've been sweating. Why don't you feel uncomfortable? Don't worry, it won't take much time. I'll bring it to you now." Tan Siwei went and came back quickly. He brought the plum soup for Ning Shu, but he himself ran back and forth in the hot weather. His face was covered with sweat. Ning Shu was unable to reject such a thoughtful gesture. She smiled gratefully. "Thank you for your kind intentions." Faced with Ning Shu's smile, Tan Siwei's heart blushed. A faint blush spread from his cheeks to his earlobes. His eyes became brighter with joy. "No, you're welcome. I'm happy to be able to help you." He hurriedly poured a bowl of plum soup from the pot and handed the porcelain bowl to Ning Shu. Before she could take it, another unromantic hand snatched the porcelain bowl away. "Hey, Hui Mo?" Hui Mo sneered and looked at him. "Now the situation in the capital is treacherous. Your plum soup has been left outside. Who knows if it has been tampered with?" "Let me test the poison for Miss Ning." Then he gulped down the soup, not leaving a single drop. Then he wiped his mouth. Tan Siwei was speechless and could only pour another bowl. Unexpectedly, he was stopped by Hui Mo halfway. No matter how good-tempered Tan Siwei was, he could not help but frown. Hui Mo was thick-skinned and said righteously, "Some poisons are added several times. If you drink a small amount at one time, you won't be able to detect it. Let me try another bowl." After 2 bowls of soup, Hui Mo's stomach was full of water. He burped loudly. Tan Siwei poured the soup again. He wanted to snatch it away again, But he saw Ning Shu's face was cold this time. Hui Mo was stiff and felt guilty. He had to withdraw his hand resentfully. He pouted his lips and shrank himself to the corner. Tan Siwei bent his eyebrows and continued to pour the soup. He did not expect that the water stopped when he poured half a bowl. He opened the pot and found that it was empty. Tan Siwei was embarrassed. Ning Shu did not know whether to laugh or cry. She took the small bowl of soup and said, "It's okay. I'm not thirsty. This is enough." Although the plum soup is small, the taste is excellent. It's not sour, and it's sweet but not greasy. It's best to relieve the heat in summer. Xiaoqing, you are so considerate. Tan Siwei's voice was like the wind blowing under a leaf, as long as you like it. Before Ning Shu could see Master Yuan's face clearly, she was blinded by the strong smell of alcohol on his body. The man was nearly 40 years old, and it could be seen that when he was young, he was handsome and spirited. But now, his hair had turned white and was scattered messily. His pair of eyes had long been stained by the smell of alcohol. He opened his mouth and said, "Who are you? Don't you know that I'm teaching at this hour? If you have something to say it quickly. If not, scram." Hui Mo raises his hand to fan the smell of alcohol in front of his face and looks at the courtyard through the crack of the door. There is no child reading hard. He widens his eyes ridiculously as if to say, "Teaching? Do you teach with your toes?" Master Yuan sneered disdainfully and turns around to walk back to the courtyard. He sits on the futon under the camphor tree, holding a book in one hand and the wine pot in the other. He raises his head and drinks a mouthful of wine. What do you know? This is called governing by doing nothing. Even the old man, the Taoist saint, advocates the truth. You don't know shit. It was an eye-opener to see such an arrogant and uncourteous teacher. Governing by doing nothing, it's simply, Hui Mo's face is red with anger. He wants to go forward and teach him a good lesson, but he is stopped by Ning Shu. Don't forget why we are here. Don't lose the big picture for the small. Hui Mo heavily snorts and turns his head. Out of sight, out of mind. Ning Shu doesn't care at all. She walks forward and smiles at Master Yuan. She salutes him and says politely, "Greetings, Master Yuan. I'm sorry to disturb you. We are investigating a case in the Supreme Court. Recently, there have been a few cases of missing children. One of them is a child named Chen Dongbao. I heard that he is an outstanding student of the Headmaster's Academy, so I came to ask for your advice. Please forgive me." Her words are gentle from beginning to end, neither servile nor overbearing. There is no resentment, no disdain, and no contempt. Instead, there is respect. Such an attitude and such determination makes Master Yuan think highly of Ning Shu. He puts down the book in his hand and smiles. Then he puts down the wine pot and waves his sleeves. "You want to ask about the case? Well, pour me a cup of wine first." Chapter 554. With such an attitude, even the good-tempered Tan Siwei frowned in displeasure. On the contrary, Ning Shu was not the least bit angry. She happily went forward to pour a cup of wine. Teacher is a scholar. It is my honor to be able to pour wine for teacher. Not to mention 1 cup, even 10 cups would not be enough. Teacher Yuan, please. Master Yuan was greatly pleased and laughed out loud. He took the wine cup and raised his head to drink. His eyes were hazy with drunkenness as he said, "You really know how to talk. I will be kind and help you. What do you want to ask?" Ning Shu said first, "Teacher Yuan, what do you think of Dongbao? Is he well behaved in the academy?" "Maybe. I have so many children here. How can I remember all of them? That little fatty has only been here for half a year. It seems that his family makes lanterns. He often brings some broken lanterns to me and begs for forgiveness for a few days. Well, they are all piled up in the corner. Even half a pot of wine is not enough to exchange for broken lanterns. If it were not for his mother who begged me to repair the lanterns, I would have kicked him out. Ning Shu secretly frowned but did not show it on her face. She continued to smile and said, "Teacher, do you know which children Dong Bao likes to be close to in the academy?" Teacher Yuan sneered contemptuously, "Those little monkeys are playing tricks. Who has time to watch them every day? Children, come here. Ask them if you have any questions." "Teacher, I am going to continue my studies. Don't disturb me." The free-range children in the courtyard heard the call and gathered reluctantly. Obviously, they did not like to be close to Teacher Yuan. However, they were forced by his abuse of power and had to gather together. They shrank their heads and stood in a row until they saw Teacher Yuan stagger into the room with the pot of wine. Only then did they dare to raise their necks. Looking at the pile of children in coarse clothes in front of her, the youngest was 5 or 6 years old, and the oldest was only 10 years old. They curiously and timidly looked at them. Ning Shu thought for a while and suddenly heard the hawking of candied fruits outside the wall. Ning Shu had an idea and winked at Huemo. After a while, Huemo came in with a bag full of snacks. "Monkeys, if you want to eat, line up here." The children immediately burst into a burst of enthusiastic cheers. Huemo was covered all over like little monkeys. Tan Siwei also went to help. No, there's no rush. One by one, everyone has a share." Soon, the children each had one and were very happy. Ning Shu also laughed. Master Yuan's unhappy curses came from inside the room. Ning Shu quickly put up her finger and whispered, "Shh." She led the children to the corner and asked, "Does headmaster treat you well?" The children looked at each other with the candied fruits in their mouths. The oldest child, Chunsheng, plucked up his courage and said in a low voice, "The headmaster is fine when he doesn't drink. He will give us lessons and teach us some knowledge. Sometimes he will read us some interesting stories about the big shots in the past, such as Dao Yuanming, Li Bai, and Yu Fei. However, it wouldn't be good if they drank, so they ignored us and told us to go play on the side. If someone didn't listen to him and disturbed him, it would be terrible." Huemo said, "What kind of terrible?" "He will scold people very fiercely. It's very scary. He will also punish us by copying the articles." Ning Shu said, "Are you familiar with a child named Chen Dongbao?" "Of course. He is our good brother. He is very nice and smart. I didn't finish the homework assigned by the headmaster last time. Thanks to Dong Bao, otherwise, I would have been beaten by the headmaster." Ning Shu said, "How did he help you?" "That time, the headmaster asked us to write an article in one night. I was not good at homework and couldn't write it out. The next morning, I didn't dare to go to school. I met Dong Bao on the way and he gave me his article. When the headmaster checked the homework, he asked him why he didn't write it out. He said it was in his mind and he didn't need to write it out. Then he read a new article on the spot. Yes, Dong Bao also helped me. Last time, I climbed the tree to pick the locust flower and almost fell. Dong Bao caught me and scratched his arm." The other children also talked at the same time, outlining the image of a smart and friendly little fatty. It was impossible not to like such a child. However, such a child had been abducted for no reason and no news of him had been heard from. Chapter 555. One of the smarter children looked at Ning Shu and the others cautiously and asked, "Big brother, are you here to investigate the case by asking about Dong Bao? I heard from my mother that Dong Bao was taken away by bad people. Is that true?" The children's straightforward questions made Tan Siwei and Huemo look at each other. They were a little surprised and didn't know how to tell these young children what terrible things had happened. Ning Shu bent her knees and looked at them at eye level. She nodded seriously. "Yes, something bad has happened to Dong Bao. We need your help to save him as soon as possible. Your answer is very important to both us and Dong Bao." Looking at the quiet and gentle little brother in front of them, the children clenched their little fists and said, "Well, as long as we can save Dong Bao, we will, We will definitely do anything. Ning Shu squatted down and pinched their chubby little faces. She continued to ask, now, please tell me, who is his best friend? Do you know? He's my best friend. No, he often helps me. He's my best friend. You're bragging. Dong Bao's best friend is me. Seeing that the children were about to quarrel, Ning Shu quickly asked the next question. Who did he often play with after school? The children quieted down. Every day, Dong Bao went home after school. We asked him to climb trees and fish, but he never did. He said that he had to hurry back to help his mother make lanterns, otherwise his mother would stay up late again. Yes, last time on my birthday, my mother cooked very delicious braised pork. I specially invited him to my house, but he didn't agree. But the next day, he gave me a slingshot made by his father as a gift. The other children nodded in agreement. Tan Siwei's eyes flashed across the children's innocent faces one by one. Suddenly, he saw a child who had been silent and frowning silently. It seemed that he was struggling with something. Tan Siwei was very careful and didn't miss this subtle abnormality. He walked to the front of the child and asked, "What's your name? Do you have something to say to us?" The child looked shy. When he was suddenly asked, he was a little frightened and took a step back. Tan Siwei smiled and squatted down to wipe the candied fruit stains on the corner of the child's mouth. He said softly, "Don't be afraid. You can tell us what you saw or know. As long as you tell us the truth, Dong Bao, and we will be very grateful." He had a harmless face to begin with, and his temperament was very amiable. At first glance, one could tell that he wasn't a bad person. Moreover, he spoke so gently, so the child quickly let down his guard and whispered, "A few days ago, I saw that Dong Bao didn't go home after school. He was fighting with someone on the street." As soon as the child finished speaking, he was attacked by the other children. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Dong Bao had such a good temper and was very loyal to his friends. He had never fought with anyone before. "You're not allowed to slander him. Brother, don't believe him. He's just a liar. He brags about how rich his family is and how well his parents treat him. Actually, it's all fake. His mother ran away with someone else a long time ago. Last time when we climbed the wall to steal bird eggs, he was the one who told on us and we were severely punished by the teacher. Also, when we were at the temple fair, I saw him stealing candies with my own eyes. He was caught but he didn't admit it. I'm not lying. I'm really not lying this time." The child became anxious and his eyes became misty. "I really saw Dong Bao fight with someone and he was very fierce. He smashed the other person's head with a stone and ran away after that. I swear on my mother's name that if I'm lying, I'll never see my mother again." Seeing the child's tears, Ning Shu stood up and lowered the voices of the other children. She asked softly, "Where did it happen and why? Do you know?" The child wiped his tears. "It happened at Chang'an Alley. That day, I didn't want to go home after school, so I wandered on the street and saw it by chance. I don't know why, but at that time, Dong Bao was already fighting with the two people. Dong Bao had several stones in his hand and smashed the two people's faces until they were bleeding. I was afraid that they would beat Dong Bao to death when they caught him, so I hid in the corner and shouted, 'Sir, come quickly, a kidnapper is kidnapping a child.' The two people were scared by me. When I saw Dong Bao take the opportunity to run away, I quickly ran away too. After that, I asked Dong Bao what happened. He said that there was no need to let me know and warned me not to tell anyone, so I didn't say anything." Chapter 556. Ning Shu asked a few more questions, but the children were confused. Master Yuan seemed to have woken up from a drunken sleep. He staggered out of the house and saw that Ning Shu and the others were still there. He shouted discontentedly, "Are you done? Are you done? If you're done, get out of here. Don't delay my teaching." The child immediately hid the unfinished candied fruit and obediently ran to Master Yuan's side and sat down, waiting for him to start the class. Ning Shu and the others had no choice but to prepare to retreat. However, she saw the child turn back after walking halfway, gently grabbing the corner of Ningxu's clothes. The tip of his nose was red. I stole the candy at the temple fair because I saw that the little girl's mother was too good to her. She was so good that I felt bad. I missed my mother so much. Then I stole her candy. Children who leave their mothers are very unhappy. Please find Dong Bao and bring him back, okay? Ningxu's heart tightened. She bent down and solemnly said, I promise you, I will find Dong Bao and bring him back. Stepping over the threshold of Ao Shuang Academy, Hui Mo had a belly full of anger. How is this surnamed Yuan worthy of being a teacher? He's simply insulting Confucius and Mencius. He even went as far as to ask Miss Ning to pour wine for him. This kind of person should really ask that useless Wei Zicheng to come and take down his broken plaque. Originally, I doubted that the person who planned this big case and made the children willing to trust him could be a teacher of the academy. Now it seems that I thought too much. If such a person is a teacher, it will be a great misfortune. Ningxu shook her head. Well, it's useless to scold them. If it weren't for the fact that their families were so poor that they couldn't send their children to a better academy, how could these children's parents be willing to send them here? At least there is a place where they can learn a few words. They won't have to rely on hard labor like the previous generation. There are too many things in this world that can't be helped. However, this trip is not without gain. Let's go to Chang'an Alley and ask about what happened to Dong Bao recently. Huemo drove the carriage over. Ningxu was about to get in when she suddenly remembered something. She took out a handkerchief from her sleeve and handed it to Tan Siwei. Tan Siwei didn't react in time. Ningxu smiled and glanced at the area between Tan Siwei's thumb and index finger. Shaoqing was wiping the honey stains on that child's sleeve just now. Shaoqing is such a gentle person. Tan Siwei's heart skipped a beat. He was flattered and blushed. Just as he was about to say something, he saw an officer from the Supreme Court rushing over on a horse. When he saw Tan Siwei, he didn't wait for the horse to stop and said, Shaoqing, bad news. Another child has gone missing. What? Ningxu's face was solemn. Where is the child? How old is it? Is it a boy or a girl? How long has it been missing? Tell me the details slowly. The officer didn't have time to wipe the sweat off his forehead. He took a few deep breaths and calmed down. Just now, the Jingji government received a report from a family in the west of the city. They said that their child has gone missing. This time it's a girl. She's 10 years old. She disappeared in the afternoon 2 days ago. They thought that the child ran away and didn't care about her. It wasn't until today that they realized that something was wrong. Tan Siwei frowned. It's been 2 days since the day before yesterday. It's been more than 40 hours. And it's a girl. Why did that family delay until now to report it? This is too careless. The officer said, Sigh, this little girl isn't the biological child of this family. She's a child bride that was brought home from outside. I heard that she was beaten and scolded. The neighbors often heard the sound of her family beating her. The girl couldn't fight back when she was beaten and could only hide outside. After hiding for a day and a half, she was hungry and had no choice but to run back. So, sigh. I guess that family thought it was the same this time. They didn't expect to not see her for more than 2 days. They also thought about the recent cases in the capital. They were afraid of being held responsible, so they reported it to the government. Ningxu asked, Have you found the child's keepsake and the black curse? I found it. It was found in a patch of grass not far from that house. It was an old yellow string. That family confirmed that it belonged to that child. Ningxu couldn't help but smile bitterly. Now, all 4 cases are gathered. Let's go. Please lead the way. Take us to see the situation there. No one delayed any longer. Tan Siwei quickly helped Ningxu into the carriage. Just as he was about to put down the curtain, Ningxu suddenly raised her head and looked at the corner at the end of the alley. Tan Siwei asked, What's wrong? Ningxu smiled and shook her head. Nothing. Let's go quickly. Tan Siwei also smiled and helped her sit down. He also helped her put down the bamboo curtain. He was still holding the handkerchief that Ning Shu had just handed to him. He couldn't bear to wipe it, so he carefully put it into his clothes and pressed it against his chest. The few of them immediately set off. When the dust kicked up by the horses' hooves fell down and the back of the carriage gradually disappeared into the distance, another carriage slowly drove out from the end of the alley. It was silent inside the carriage. Only a few muffled coughs could be heard, like sharp icicles piercing into people's ears. In the blink of an eye, he had reached this point. Death was already destined. When he left, he still had her in his heart. Although he was dead, his heart was still full. If you still force me to dig out my heart and clean it out of her, Juicy, that would be the greatest cruelty to me. I had no extravagant hopes. I only wanted to spend the last few days where she was, to breathe the same air with her, to hear her faint voice from afar. Even if she doesn't know that I am behind her, as long as I know, it is enough. The veins on the back of Jusai's hand were so tight that they were about to break. He clenched his teeth and didn't say a word. He turned around and was about to get off the carriage. Xiahou Qing frowned slightly. Juicy, where are you going? Jusai said heavily, this subordinate will bring Miss Ning back for you and tell her the truth. Stop. Juicy, I don't have a confidant in my life, only you. If you leave from this carriage today, then you don't have to appear in front of me again. Chapter 558. Jusai looked back in shock, his eyes trembling. Shizzy Yi, you shouldn't threaten me like this. Xiahou Qing slowly shook his head. His lips were extremely pale, without a trace of blood. He was as fragile as the last leaf on a branch on a winter night, but he stubbornly refused to leave the branch. This isn't a threat. I'm asking you to fulfill my wish. It wasn't an order or a compulsion, but a plea. The most peerless Shizzy Yi in his heart would actually lower his head one day for a woman, an obsession that he couldn't give up. Jusai couldn't describe his current feelings. He only felt his throat clog up, making him unable to speak for a long time. He raised his head to look at the sky. He couldn't find a single cloud in the blue sky. The sun was so bright that it was dazzling. He finally stepped back and said hoarsely, this subordinate doesn't dare to disobey Shizzy Yi's wishes. Xiahou Qing smiled faintly, very gratified. Thank you. A moment later, he calmed down and said, that's right. Jusai, what's the result of the matter I asked you to investigate? When we confronted that person in the ruined temple on that rainy night, how many people in the palace weren't in their positions? Jusai said, reporting to Shizzy Yi, the flag we planted in the palace hasn't been lazy these days. It's just that the current situation in the palace is indeed treacherous. The slightest carelessness would alert the enemy, so we didn't dare to make any big moves. Today, we finally have some progress on the list of names. This subordinate has looked carefully. On that rainy night, coinciding with the case of Princess Heloise's sudden death, many people entered and left the palace. However, this subordinate feels that one of them is very strange. Who? Jusai thought for a moment. In Xiahou Qing's outstretched palm, he seriously wrote down the character Yin stroke by stroke. Xiahou Qing immediately understood and couldn't help but frown. You're talking about 6th Prince Xiao Yunyi's birth mother, Yin She? Jusai's expression was grave. Yes. As a concubine in the harem, she shouldn't have left the palace so casually. However, when Princess Royal was frightened and lost her beloved daughter, she fainted from the shock and pain. Yin Jiaoyi was very good at acupuncture when she was young, so she asked His Majesty to let her try acupuncture to help Princess Royal. His Majesty was burning with anxiety at the time and allowed it. Yin Jiaoyi left the palace the day before and didn't return until noon the next day. Xiahou Qing had a photographic memory. Soon, he dug out the woman who had kept a low profile for almost 20 years and had almost no presence in the harem from the sea of memories. Her ancestors were sixth-rank doctors in the imperial hospital. Her ancestral moxibustion technique was unparalleled in the world. When she was young, she followed her grandfather into the palace to treat the illness of the late emperor. Because of a moment of carelessness, she injured the emperor's body and caused it to bleed. She should have been sentenced to death as a warning to others. Fortunately, Empress Ju pitied her and interceded for her, saving the lives of her entire family. Later on, when the emperor ascended the throne, he suddenly had a headache. Because of his grandfather's death, he summoned Lady Yin to the palace to have a try. Because of this, she was favored by the emperor and was conferred the title of concubine. It was a much-told story at that time. However, her temperament was indifferent and she was timid. In less than 2 years, she fell out of favor. She gave birth to a son, Xing Liu, but it was difficult to protect him. Later on, Empress Cao personally adopted her until today. Ju Sai said in a low voice, "Could this Lady Yin Jiaoyi, who has been enduring hardships, be the person we have been searching for?" Xiahou Qing's slender fingers slowly rubbed the edge of the cup. "Whether it is her or not, we should get to know this Lady Yin Jiaoyi, who has endured for 20 years. Send someone to keep an eye on her. I have a premonition that she must have played a heavy role in these strange and unpredictable matters." Ju Sai, "Other than this matter, did you find anything else?" Ju Sai said again, "I don't know if this matter is important or not, but the deposed concubine Lady Jiang, who fought with the empress for the position of the eldest son of the emperor's wife more than 20 years ago and lost. Last night, she died." Xiahou Qing's brows showed deep thought. "Who did it?" "The sixth prince, Xiao Yuni. According to our people, Lady Jiang was alone with the sixth prince for an hour before she died. She let out an extremely presumptuous and wild laugh, and then it stopped abruptly. When the sixth prince stepped out of the cold palace, his sword was already covered in blood. Lady Jiang was beheaded under his sword for the crime of poisoning the emperor." The 2 short pieces of news did not add up to more than a few sentences, but they seemed to be mixed with an immeasurable storm. They had already lifted half of the roof of the luxurious Dragon City and were ready to destroy it at any time. Xiahou Qing's fingers tightened around the cup. He straightened his back. In a short moment, countless waves flashed across his face. Then, he said seriously, "Did Prince Ku's mansion accept my invitation?" "Yes, but His Highness Prince Ku said that he is unwell and will not see anyone." Xiahou Qing slammed the bottom of the cup on the small table. His face was like a fully drawn bow with an arrow on the string, ready to shoot at any time. "Drive. If he doesn't want to see me, then I will go see him." Chapter 559. There was no one in the capital who did not know that the youngest brother of the current emperor, the owner of the moon-chasing restaurant, the most absurd and lazy prince in the history of Great Yu who loved money as much as his own life. He was still single at the age of 30, the most famous playboy of the 9 nations, Prince Ku. His palace was truly a splendid sight, with gold and jade as its bricks, dazzling and fragrant. Perhaps even the emperor's palace was not as ostentatious as it was. However, such a lively and joyous mansion was as cold as winter today. It was somber and desolate, without any of its former splendor. No one dared to make the slightest sound. Not even a drop of sweat fell from their foreheads. They didn't even dare to let it fall to the ground, fearing that they would be unlucky. This was because the owner of this palace, ever since his niece, the most pampered Princess Helui in Great Yu besides the princess, died on the streets, he shut himself in and drank himself to excess. In just 11 or 12 days, the once carefree and handsome prince who always had a playful smile on his face had been reduced to a half-dead and disheveled state. Outside the house, under the corridor that was hung with white silk, little Red Yang stood anxiously. She heard a crisp pah sound from inside the house. Once again, a wine bottle was smashed. Xiao Minglan squeezed her throat and choked with sobs. Her heart was also suppressed. She could not bear it any longer and pushed the guards outside the door aside, rushing in and hugging the drunk Xiao Minglan. With tears in her eyes, she begged, "Your Highness, please don't be like this, okay? For the past 10 days, you have been drinking yourself to death and not eating or drinking. If you continue like this, something will happen to you. The dead cannot come back to life." Because he drank too much wine, Xiao Minglan's entire body was trembling. His lips were purple, and his eyes were protruding from his uncontrollable emotions. He roared, "Shut up. Who let you in? I said get lost, don't you understand? All of you, get out." Little Hong Yang closed her eyes and shook her head vigorously. She hugged his shoulders tightly and did not let go. Huge teardrops rolled down from the corners of her eyes. She sobbed, "I can get lost. As long as your Highness says it, I can even die here. But Princess Heloise's death was not caused by you, so it has nothing to do with you. Why do you torture yourself like this? You are also made of flesh and blood, a mortal body. If you continue to abuse yourself like this, you will also die." Xiao Minglan's eyes suddenly trembled. Her face revealed an illusory and blurry smile. She squeezed out words that were as sharp as knives from her dry throat. "Who said it has nothing to do with me? I killed He Rui. It was me." Little Red Smoke was stunned. "Your Highness, what are you talking about?" Xiao Minglan pried her arms away and staggered to his feet. His bare feet had long kicked his boots to God knows where. He walked absent-mindedly in the empty main hall that was filled with the fragrance of wine. He did not seem to care that his feet stepped on the broken pieces of the wine jars, leaving patches of red on them. It was as if his sense of pain had been completely cut off by him. His eyes were bloodshot as he laughed miserably under Little Red Smoke's terrified gaze. "You didn't hear wrong. I was the one who killed He Rui. If it wasn't for me adding fuel to the fire, He Rui would not have ended up like this today. Ever since Imperial Brother bestowed a marriage upon her that day at the banquet, I had no intention of letting her live a carefree life. Thus, I specially mustered a large force and went to Xiangti Mountain to cause a ruckus, causing a huge uproar in the city. Afterwards, I set up that trap and used the phrase female lead Han Wang to push her into the fire pit. If it wasn't for my clever plan, how would He Rui have met with such a disaster on her way out of the palace? So the person who killed her was none other than her biological uncle, who was closely related to her by blood. If it wasn't me who killed her, who else could it be? I, Xiao Jinglan, am the executioner who caused her death. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.